Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to see you all here today. Hello and welcome to the Globe's Nuclear Now event. As mentioned, my name is Ryan McDonald. I'm your host for the afternoon. I'm a senior editor at the Globe and Mail, and I lead a team of fantastic journalists covering energy and natural resources in Canada and around the world. So I'd like to welcome you all, as well as our virtual audience who are tuning in online. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that the Globe and Mail's headquarters is situated on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. My colleagues and I are grateful for the opportunity to live and work in this space. So on behalf of the Globe and Mail, I would also like to thank our sponsors, OPG as a presenting sponsor, Westinghouse and CanDo Energy Inc. As gold sponsors, and Canadian Nuclear Association, Aecon Nuclear, and WSP as brand partners. We truly appreciate you being part of this discussion today. I think it's going to be a good one. So over the next few hours, we're going to be talking about nuclear. We're going to be talking about the Canadian nuclear industry, and we have a slew of leaders in this room, and I hope you will all get a chance to speak to each other as well. We're going to be exploring how industry strengths are being expanded and mobilized to grow domestic nuclear capabilities. And then we're going to turn our attention to the financing of large-scale nuclear projects. After a refreshment break, we're going to return to the discussion to challenges and opportunities in the nuclear supply chain. And then we're going to wrap up our day by looking at global opportunities for Canada. So some very exciting topics. I'm excited to announce two that to start us off, we have a very kind message from the Honourable Tim Hodgson, the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. There are a few things happening in Ottawa, so he could not be here with us today, but he has sent us a lovely video. So if the AV team could roll the video, we'll allow him to kick things off.
Hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde. My name is Tim Hodgson and I'm Canada's Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. Thank you all for coming together today, and to the Globe and Mail for putting together such a timely and in-depth conversation with leaders from across Canada's nuclear ecosystem on how innovation, investment, and partnership can propel Canada's nuclear industry forward to power Canada's energy future. Regretfully, I'm unable to be with you in person. However, as you can imagine, this topic is at the forefront of my mind on a daily basis, and I look forward to joining you in conversation in Toronto soon. As the Prime Minister often says, we are at a hinge moment, faced with increasing global uncertainty and insecurity. We need to start investing in ourselves because we can give ourselves more than anyone can take away. It's time to bring new ideas to the table to ensure a secure, sustainable energy future for this country and the world. Today's event is exactly that, how Canada can continue to build on its decades-long nuclear energy leadership. We are a nation of CANDU reactors, world-class uranium deposits, SMR innovation. As we transition to a new lower carbon energy mix, we will be working to have an affordable, reliable grid. We have an ambitious goal of tripling our nuclear capacity in the next 20 years while maintaining the highest standards of safety, sustainability, and social responsibility. The Darlington New Nuclear Project is a prime example of how we are doing this. In September, the federal government referred the project to our Major Projects Office, formalizing our new government's commitment to making Canada the first G7 country to build an SMR and positioning Ontario as a global leader in deployment of SMR technology for use across this country and around the world. This was made possible with the help of the Canada Growth Fund and the Building Ontario's Fund equity commitments to finance the project. Announced by the Prime Minister and Premier Ford this fall, Canada and Ontario are investing up to $3 billion in the project because investing in ourselves is how we'll get ahead. Once complete, Darlington's first of 4 planned SMR units will provide reliable, affordable, clean power to 300,000 homes while sustaining almost 18,000 jobs during construction. The development of this strategy will strategically build on Canada's competitive advantage to strengthen supply chains, catalyze innovation, and attract interest from global markets. Canada is leading when it comes to nuclear energy, and we are going to keep delivering on our vision of a secure future with nuclear energy as a key building block. We are building a stronger, more independent, more affordable, and more prosperous Canada, and I know that discussions you are having today will mirror just that. Thank you for all you are doing, and I wish you a wonderful event. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you, Minister Hodgson. I also have a few things to say. I think I was motivated by Bad Bunny's appearance at the Super Bowl last night while trying to understand a bit about timing and his timing and his message for the world last night. The ancient Greeks had two words for time, for the concept of time. One was chronos, and the word chronos is, you probably recognize this as the root word for the English word chronological, which refers to measured or ticking time. But time does not end there. The Greek second word for time is kairos. It's lesser known, but no less important. Kairos is what many philosophers and mystics would refer to as deep time. Kairos means the right or critical moment to perform an action. It's this second notion of time, kairos, the unique and perfect moment for decisive and effective action, where we find ourselves today as a nation. Clean, reliable, and affordable energy systems are no longer just environmental and economic priorities, they are strategic assets. Electricity grids, in particular, have become the backbone of global industrial competition, digital growth, decarbonization, and energy security. And one only needs to look around the world to understand the immensity of the opportunity when it comes to nuclear energy and its potential to contribute to the world's energy mix. Just last week, Britain unveiled a framework to accelerate the development of advanced nuclear reactors, aiming to become a global leader. In May, President Donald Trump signed an executive order to boost domestic nuclear production by cutting regulations and fast-tracking new licenses. His orders lay out a plan to modernize nuclear regulation, streamline nuclear reactor testing, deploy nuclear reactors for national security, and to reinvigorate the nuclear industrial base. In Japan, the Japanese utility is planning to restart a nuclear reactor at its plant early next week after a setback, which I'm sure we've all heard about, halted the process last month. And this comes as the Japanese government, newly elected as of this weekend with a strong majority, looks to nuclear to return in an effort to curb carbon emissions, cut expensive fossil fuel imports, and secure a stable source of power to meet its rising electricity demand. China is quickly becoming a global leader in nuclear power, with nearly as many reactors under construction as the rest of the world combined. It's building nuclear plants at an extraordinary pace. By 2030, China's nuclear capacity is set to surpass that of the United States, the first country to split atoms to make electricity. Many of China's reactors are derived from American and French designs, yet China has overcome the construction delays and cost overruns that have often bogged down Western efforts to expand nuclear power. At the same time, China is pushing the envelope, making breakthroughs in next-generation nuclear technologies that have eluded the West. In this new global era of nuclear power, Canada is uniquely positioned to lead. Canada has a storied history as both an early adopter and exporter of traditional reactor technologies, as well as being a supplier of uranium. Today, Canada is stepping into a far more prominent role, embracing innovation and advancing next-generation technologies. Saskatchewan, Ontario, New Brunswick, and Alberta have all signed on to an interprovincial plan for SMR development. In 2021, Ontario Power Generation selected GE Hitachi's BWRX 300 design for deployment at Darlington new nuclear project. As Minister Hodgson said, and I'm sure you'll hear this quite often today, once built, the Darlington project is anticipated to be the first SMR in the G7. So the Darlington SMR project is not just a milestone for Canada, it is being watched around the world. This is the third Globe Nuclear event here in Toronto, and it's been interesting for me to watch the discussion continue to evolve and quickly. And to my eye, there has been a clear shift. We are no longer talking about a nuclear renaissance. We are talking about deliverables. Discussions that begin in the East are now happening in the West. In Saskatchewan, work is also underway to bring nuclear power online. Sask Power has created a new subsidiary, Sask Nuclear Inc., to lead regulatory and business development for the potential development of nuclear power in Saskatchewan. Alberta has recently kicked off its own public and industry consultations to determine how nuclear energy can be integrated into Alberta's current energy mix. An expert panel is expected to issue a final report to Alberta's Minister of Affordability and Utilities in March. So what is the Globe and Mail's role in all of this? And why do we continue hosting these events beyond serving a really good lunch with a great view? Firstly, as an organization, it is our core belief. It is what drives our decisions and what drives our day-to-day operations is that we are here to build a better Canada. To that end, and in this time, the Globe is committed to covering the economic opportunity that nuclear represents for Canadian industry and business. The global market for SMRs is projected to be worth $150 to $300 billion by 2040, according to Natural Resources Canada. With this growth comes economic opportunity, especially for regions that invest early. While Canada is making significant strides, obviously challenges remain. Licensing, public engagement, Indigenous consultations, fuel supply, and waste management are all critical components of success that require coordinated planning, strong partnerships, and regulatory foresight. And that is the second focus of our coverage. On the regulatory side, the Globe will continue to push to ensure that transparency and public participation are core principles. As Canada embarks on a renewed era of nuclear development, from SMRs to advanced nuclear reactor designs, the strength of its regulatory regime has never been more critical. A clear, transparent, and consistent framework not only applies safety and public confidence, but also helps convert ambition into delivery. And finally, on managing financial risk, that is costs, the challenges of nuclear are well known. High upfront capital costs compared to other sources, along with the potential for cost overruns and construction delays. With governments and with taxpayers now sharing the risk of these investments, it's our job to ensure that financial transparency and accountability are at the forefront. So the path ahead is not quick, it is not easy, it's not cheap, but Canada's position is strong. The decisions we make now on policy, on investment, on engagement, and on regulatory modernization will shape not only our future energy mix, but also our contribution to decarbonization and allow Canada to continue to stand tall as an energy-secure nation that is beholden to no one. This is a moment of national and international significance, and the world is watching Canada. We are one of the rare few nations that can design, build, implement, and export some of the most sophisticated machines that man has ever invented. It is our time. Minutes away?
He's in the building, he's just going to be there just 1 moment.
Okay. Well,
Do you
that's...
want any jokes?
Well, I kind of gave my full nationalist vibe there. I was pretty excited. Minister Lecce is a couple of minutes late, but he is in the building. So we're honored that he's here to talk to us today. So maybe while we're waiting, we can figure out what maybe Adam wants to come to the stage. Is Adam here? Yeah, come on up, Adam. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Sit down. Well, in the absence of the minister being here, I guess you and I can talk about what you're going to talk to the minister about.
Yeah, I'm gonna apologize off the top to make this even more awkward. My voice is kind of giving out on me. It's holding up for the moment. So my plan was to ask short questions to him and then let him do all the talking. But I will try to sound.
Yeah, I think off the top, I was going to apologize that most of the Globe and Mail journalists are either sick or in the process of becoming ill. It's been a very an intense news cycle over the past little while, but we're struggling through it. So.
I guess, Ryan, I'll as long as my voice will hold out, I'll just to follow up a bit on what you said. I mean, in terms of sort of watching trends over the last few years, and I would take this a little bit broader than just even nuclear and into electricity policy in general. You know, I remember when I first went on to the sort of climate and sort of energy transition beat a few years ago. You know, it barely felt as though electricity demand was on the radar in Canada. You know, it was the sense of we have an abundance of it. We're not in. You know, we have this advantage to begin with, and I would say a degree of complacency while other countries were actually investing more heavily. And I remember doing a big feature along those lines, somewhere around 2019 or 20. I'm not saying that feature changed this dynamic, but it's been encouraging to see in the last few years. Both at the federal and the provincial levels, a lot more emphasis on electricity supply, you know, both in the sense of trying to build up, to some extent, although this has been not super successful so far, but building up ties between provinces, but also investing heavily within, the federal government trying to incentivize that, which we've seen, including on nuclear. And obviously, you know, when we're talking about a large-scale technology like this, setting aside the SMRs for a moment, but even on you know, discussions of new reactors and so on, I mean, the idea of investing that heavily in new supply a few years ago, I don't think was even barely on the radar. So that's certainly been a massive change. I would also say, although we'll touch on this a little bit, hopefully in discussions today, you know, that the narrative around nuclear feels like it's changed. I mean, I think many of us are old enough to remember you know, when environmental movement, even in Canada, was positioned more against it than it is now. It's not the same everywhere in the world, but certainly here. But even more recently, the sense of cost and inefficiency that surrounded this industry. You know, I certainly remember covering Ontario politics, you know, over a decade ago now, but that was a recurring theme. And you know, a sense of there was not a lot of appetite for new investments that were likely to run over time, over budget. Put way more weight on the rate base and so on. You know, that I wouldn't say that's gone away, but I think some recent successes on the, particularly on the refurbishment side here, have maybe helped to shift that a little bit. So it does feel like, along with other factors, which I suppose we can also discuss if we're stalling for time some more, it does feel as though the forces have kind of aligned a little bit more than even just maybe 5 or 10 years ago.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the notion of on time, on budget is something we'll probably hear a lot about today. I know that you and I have talked a little bit about, well, quite a bit about the Canada Growth Fund, what it was created for, what it was meant to do. We now have, I guess, one of the biggest investments in the fund's history in, you know, what is an industry that is not without risk. What do you think the significance is of the Canada Growth Fund weighing in with such a big financial investment into nuclear at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a signal, and it's not even just the CGF. I mean, the Canada Infrastructure Bank before went in too, and I know, and even in that case, there was a sense of, I mean, partly the financing was helpful in terms of concessionary financing, but also there was a desire, I think, from I know from the Ontario level, and I've heard this from folks around OPG or elsewhere, sort of a vote of confidence that Ottawa was able to give via that. And I think there's a little more of that with the CGF. Plus, obviously, the risks are considerable. And the idea of all of these, I mean, they vary in their mandates. and the CGF has more of a mandate of earning some return on its investment in a different way, and using more creative mechanisms to do so. But the general idea is these agencies can help invest in things that make a lot of sense in the long term economically for Canada, but have short-term hiccups. And to me, that's a reflection of sort of longer-term thinking of, we can't afford to let the nearer-term challenges get in the way of infrastructure or investments that we need in the long run.
The infrastructure bank has sort of shifted its focus at this point. And maybe you can talk a little bit about where that focus is now coming from.
Yeah, I think I got a thumbs up there. So is the minister here? He is. All right. All right. I spent a lot of time on the CAB, so I can go on about this as long as I need to. But here he comes, I think.
Believe me, he's worth it. I mean, we're very glad that he's here.
Okay. I will speak slowly and save my voice here and invite the minister up to the stage.
Okay, great. So we're pleased to have the Honourable Stephen Lecce, Ontario Minister of Energy and Mines, joining us for a fireside chat here. We don't have
I don't think I'm contagious. You're also
Yes.
okay. Welcome, Minister. I gather you're also under the weather. Is this true?
Yes.
We're going to keep a distance from each other and try not to spread our germs further. And you can all just take like 3 seats back and be fine.
It's good to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. So I want to give you a chance off the top, and we've touched on this a little bit already. But Ontario is obviously making some pretty huge investments and planning some huge investments for the sector. I mean, Ryan touched off the top on the SMRs. You've completed some refurbishments. There's more in the works. You are looking seriously at new large-scale reactors for the first time in some decades. So off the top, I just want to give you a bit of a chance to just tell us a bit about why is Ontario going so big on nuclear in a way that it hasn't in terms of new investment in a long time.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's really, I'm just looking around, I'm like, this is sort of everyone in the energy ecosystem. So thank you for being present. Thank you to the Globe for hosting us. I mean, look, we need more power. I mean, fundamentally, the problem we're trying to solve is we need a reliable, clean power to energize the economy for the next 25 years. And so the question fundamentally for us all and public policymakers is, what is the greatest return on investment in the national interest when it comes to supply chain, when it comes to the industrial benefits, the workforce benefits, and which is reliable 24/7 baseload power. And when those are the criterion by which we evaluate our decisions, I think it's so obvious the future is nuclear. It does not preclude the importance of an all-the-above approach, which means all resources must be part of our grid. It's a strength. But we already are. I mean, just to the point you're suggesting, we're really doubling down on nuclear. I mean, as a basis, we're starting with 50% of our baseload power already nuclear generated. This has been a multi-partisan, a multi-generational reality for Canada for 50 plus, 60 plus years. So the intention is to fix the problem of power. The strategy is to use a disciplined builders, be it through operators, be it through OPG or Bruce, to deliver the power, to do it with an on-time, on-budget track record that I think is now becoming mainstream in this province and country, which is unique in the world. OPG's in the house today. I would be remiss to not remind you all of the unprecedented global news that was achieved last Monday when Ontario returned a unit 4 months ahead of schedule and its completion of its entirety of that refurb, $150 million below budget. So that is the basis for our why. We need the power. There's a cost to inaction, and there's a cost to the triumph of ideology over pragmatism. And I think the most obvious national interest baseload option is to double down on the Canadian nuclear success story. 90,000 workers. We're looking at between Wesleyville, a project you will all know, up to 10,000 megawatts east of Toronto, in Bruce C, just shy of 5,000 net new megawatts in Bruce Peninsula. Those two projects alone and the SMRs, the small modular reactors being built in Darlington, add 16,000 plus more megawatts of clean power, of nuclear power. That's $800 billion in economic advantage to our economy when we need this boost. It's 150,000 net new jobs. And so I know we're going to talk about we're going to compare and contrast the resources, but I mean, rhetorically, I'm asking you all, What is the alternative that creates that type of value chain benefit, that type of economic stimulus that uses 93 to 95% of the ecosystem of the supply chain is made in Canada? That is not the case for wind. It is not the case for solar. And I'm not in any means suggesting those are not important resources. I'm just simply want to have an intellectually honest discussion, which I know, Adam, with you, it always is the case. But I want facts to prevail. And that's why the Premier has determined ultimately nuclear is going to be the driving part, sort of impetus of our baseload expansion from 50 to 75%, but it will not preclude hydro or natural gas, or for that matter, renewables, storage, and likewise biomass and biogas. All of that is going to be really important as we build for the future.
Thanks. I want to follow up a bit on the economic opportunities coming out of this. Let's start with the SMRs there, because you will hear some questions there. That unlike the larger scale reactors, that's not the technology itself is not a Canadian technology in the same way. I think you still see some economic opportunity there from deploying it here. I wonder if you could speak a bit to that, because I don't know that maybe it is to people in this room, but I don't know. But certainly something I hear somewhat is, sure. Okay, so what does this do for Ontario since it's essentially hosting a not Canadian technology?
So there really is, first off, it's an important question. I mean, we are operating, I think when the Prime Minister speaks about a rupture, I think he speaks for the subconscious of the nation. I mean, I agree with that premise, and I think we all recognize we have to reorient our trade relationships and our assumptions of alliances. This decision made going back many, many years was predicated on choosing the most de-risked technology option with the most efficacious design that is well advanced. Ultimately, we're expending billions of dollars. We want to get this right. So we went with the best technology partner as a first principle. The reactor design is well advanced relative to the competitors of Rolls-Royce, for example. The OPG Darlington, the new Darlington project, the 4 SMRs that we are building, the first one we are building today in the fleet of 4 that we will build, that first project, that first unit, will be generating power by year 2030. The project is roughly a 19,000 job creator for the province, just for the construction alone, and over 3,500 permanent jobs. But when you speak about the value to Ontario, given the origin of the tech is in the US, we were able to negotiate with GE Hitachi that 80% at minimum of each SMR we build will leverage made in Ontario, made in Canada materials. So that's a huge value add. And so far, and I know this because I see John here from our friends in Cambridge, and likewise other friends from the company that are building some of the largest materials to support our nuclear expansion. On the SMRs, there's $500 million of supply chain benefits secured to date. We can point to the 80 companies right now in this province that are fired up, and they've got people working as a basis for this expansion. It's a huge achievement and a huge advantage. The other element is, how do we service the global SMR fleet? A study came out just months ago. They're estimating $150 billion annualized business development opportunity for the world when it comes to SMRs. We are embracing first movers advantage. We are literally the first, building in the G7 at a grid scale commercial SMR. So we were able to negotiate with the business to say, look, we're taking the risk. We're the first. We'll take the risk and also the advantages, but we're the first in the world. We want to see more domestic advantage for Canada. And so we announced with the company in the fall that GE Hitachi will be building a service center for the entire SMR fleet in Ontario, about a $70 million investment, as I recall. That investment allows us to train the entire maintenance teams that are going to help service and maintain the assets for roughly 65 years. So we're at the center of the supply chain action. Ontario owns via OPG part of the IP of the reactor design. So we make us, reasonably small, but still notable profit every time we deploy them. And when you think about countries like Poland, on the front line of Vladimir Putin's aggression, or certainly understanding the importance of decoupling from natural gas dependence from Russia, they want clean power. And when we were there, it was amazing to see that Ontario and OPG, through Laurentis and others, are emerging as a solution. I mean, just as a case study for this, we had Saskatchewan and Alberta sign on with New Brunswick on this SMR deployment, a national deployment across Canada. Nova Scotia, the Minister of Energy, you may know him, Tim Houston, the Premier, signed on as well. And so we now have an increasing level of momentum to build this type of technology from coast to coast. But regardless, we're building it with a sense of discipline, with a clear economic return on investment. Jobs are being created, $39 billion according to the Conference Board of Canada. I mean, these are not insignificant numbers. And the feds, to their credit, back the project as a project of national consequence, national importance. So I think it builds momentum for you all, and I think it should build confidence that we've been thoughtful about how to maximize the economic benefits to Canada. That is the Premier's bottom line. It's what is this, how is this going to help create a job for a worker? And there's a reason why all the skilled worker unions have come out endorsing the project, because they see it as an opportunity to keep their folks employed for 65 years, which is the life cycle of that asset.
Thanks. Let me ask you on the economic benefits side as well, on the larger scale reactors. I mean, provided that you do decide to move forward with them. There's going to be heated competition, obviously, to supply those, and there's Canadian companies, Atkins-Realis and Westinghouse now, more or less Canadian, that will be certainly at the forefront of that. Not that they're necessarily the only possible competitors for it, but how much does that fact, I know you probably don't want to get deep into how that competition would shake out, but how much does the potential opportunity to help them there, which is, these are companies that are looking to make plays, obviously internationally, for all the demand that we've been discussing already today. How much is that part of the decision-making process there, or is that something you have to kind of just shove to the side and just worry solely about domestic need?
Well, I think our determination needs to be exclusively predicated on what's in the national interest of Canada. When it comes, we're one of 6 nations, just to flex our muscle for a moment. We're one of 6 with a civilian nuclear technology. And I think that's something we should be proud of. We have technology partners, we have ownership models, Canadian, in a variety of these spaces. The supply chain is deeply Canadian, so we're very proud of this. We think about uranium, our friends from Cameco, a quarter of global uranium is processed in this province, with high-grade uranium coming from Saskatchewan. So it's a really beautiful made-in-Canada industrial success story. Our determinations will really be premised on the maximized benefit. We think about intellectual property, making sure, given we think just some of the rather incoherence and problematic language of the U.S. President, the White House, and I'm being very generous and diplomatic, but I think having an IP that is stored in this country is in our national interest. And that could apply to either of the large companies you cited. Supply chain benefits are very consequential. And I actually think creating pressure on the businesses to come up with the best option for the province to select is something that's good for the ratepayer, good for the taxpayer. So it's a bit early in the stage, but we're starting to think about how do we build more in Canada? How do we use long lead times? Because when you start to think of the energy forecast, really in the early 2040s is when it starts to really emerge. We've got other resources unlocked between now and then, but in the 2031, 32, 33, 41, 42, 43, that's when it creates an element of pressure. And thus, we need to start today in order to secure the power for tomorrow. But we've got the benefit of, 12, 15, 16 years. And so the question I'm challenging those specific companies and others is, what can you build in this country that gives you the competitive advantage over the competitor? And I think workers, industrial benefits, and obviously IP are part of the considerations that Ontario is going to, once we land that decision. But you said if we pursued large-scale nuclear. Usually you're correcting me, Adam, but allow me just to add some proviso here. We are building large-scale nuclear. I mean, the determination is not if we do it. Otherwise, this is this is the intellectual sort of ecosystem. You're going to have to tell me how I produce 16,000 megawatts of baseload power when we're pretty much tapped out of much of our hydro. What are alternatives? I mean, I wouldn't want to believe that there's a consensus we want to fire up natural gas for baseload. I mean, that's not an option for the province, given that we have a clean grid and we have a plan to have a cleaner grid. So thus, the options are limited, and clearly, nuclear is something that benefits the country.
Sorry, now there goes my voice. I wanted to follow up a bit on the demand side, which you've touched on a little bit already. I mean, obviously, there's a history of demand being difficult to project. We've seen this. It bit the last government in Ontario to some extent of an investment, then demand dipped. I think there's some cause for greater confidence in a steady demand increase, but considering that you're banking on, maybe not quite a doubling of demand, but certainly significant steady increases, I want you to speak a little bit to what gives confidence there that you don't wind up caught in a situation where you've actually overbuilt and then, you know, based on fluctuating demand or dips that we can't see coming or whatever else might cause that.
Yeah. The good thing is that first off, the ISO has, I think a conservative assumption when they come up with their demand forecast. And you're right, it's not linear. There has been, even just last year to this year, just based on economic uncertainty due to who, we are in this position. So we're at a 65% demand forecast. Today, the high, though, according to the ISO, is up to 90%. So you're right, there is an element of variance, and how do we de-risk it so we get it right? I think we have been prudent in the sequencing of resources that we're bringing online. It allows governments optionalities now and in the future governments to pull back if required. I'll give a case study. We launched the largest public competitive energy procurement in Canadian history. So it's called LT2 for those inside the bubble. This was significant. It was 5,000 megawatts, which we originally launched, and then I said, okay, I think we need more power, frankly, based on a 75% demand forecast. So we increased it to 7,500 megawatts of power. Technology agnostic, renewables will play, an important role of that competition. Governments in the future, because the way we've cadenced and sequenced the procurements, it allows now and in 1 and 2 and 3 years the ability of governments to sort of rev up or sort of pull back on the amount of megawatts we have to secure based on the economic uncertainty in the horizon. So you're right. We don't want to be in the business where we're producing power and spilling it or wasting it, or the former government was contemplating decommissioning Pickering in part because of that reality, and that would have been very problematic for Ontario today. So we rely on our forecast teams to do this at the ISO. We have confidence in them to do it. But we've cadenced this where we have SMRs coming on the 30s, net new hydro coming on the mid to late 30s, layers of additions that obviously could be pulled back. On large-scale nuclear, it also gives us the ability to make a determination on the number of units we want to bring online. Bruce C is slightly ahead. They're in the pre-development work relative to the Wesleyville project. Bruce C is about 4,600 megawatts of net new power. Wesleyville could be up to 10,000. The time between those two projects also allows governments in the coming years to ultimately select the amounts of units and thus the amount of megawatts required, really based on better assumptions. But it's a fair point. It's a fair element that we have to monitor, and what we've been doing is scrutinizing them to come up with the ISO, to come up with the most prudent long-term trajectory of power. And everywhere in Canada, nationally, they're looking at a doubling of the grid. So I think we've been conservative and prudent, but we have the ability to step it up or down based on variables in global economic outputs, and we'll see what happens over the next even just few short years with respect to the tariffs and the other broader pressures on the province and the country.
Yeah, and of course the speed of the energy transition can be difficult to predict too, as we've seen in the last couple of years, right? So, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, although you did touch on this a little bit, on the cost side, because that always comes up. With nuclear, and we were discussing, I think, a little bit before you in the room, there is a history of expensiveness, overruns, delays, et cetera. I know you can certainly point to the recent refurbishment, but I do want to give you a bit more chance to address that, because obviously your government, I think, is pretty concerned with both the burden on ratepayers and on the tax base. So I just want to give you a bit more chance to kind of expand on what gives you confidence here that we won't see disproportionate costs put there, and that this remains, relative to other options, which there are many. What makes this at least tolerable from the cost side, from your perspective?
Yeah. Well, I actually believe this is the most affordable option for the people of Ontario, and the numbers bear the truth. I mean, the levelized cost of nuclear power is well below the alternatives of solar and wind, for example, which are often the resources that are compared by some in the public discourse. So that is according to the OEB. It's not my opinion. It is an objective truth of the levelized cost, the asset over the course of its, that it will operate. That reliable 24/365 power is the best return on investment for the ratepayer. The truth is, we're going to, if we agree that there's a problem, we need more power. We agree we need at least 65% more power, maybe 70, maybe 90. Well, then we're investing regardless. I mean, this bizarre, perspective by some, not the Globe, but by some, that will argue like it's either nuclear or zero cost. We're expending tens and tens of billions of dollars regardless, unless you want to have brownouts or look like Portugal or Spain in the winter. We need reliable power. So the first principle is we have a bias for baseload power, which is what industry needs, the green economy will require, or the mines in Northern Ontario. We've got 40 under active expansion as we speak. We need baseload power. So the first principle is we need to invest in more power, period. Then the question is, how do we secure the lowest cost power? And so when I think about, and I'll just go sort of issue by issue to address some of these concerns. The first is we often think about the life cycle of these assets. When you think about renewables, they often have a 20 to 25-year lifespan. Nuclear has roughly 80-year lifespan with the refurbishment capacity. Hence why when you sort of use the common denominator of 80 years, you get a much lower cost option for the people of Ontario. The second is the supply chain origin. We talked about it off the top. International affairs has, I think, rightfully created some guardrails on policymakers to make sure we're benefiting our country or Western democratic values writ large if it can't be made at home in Canada. And the wind and solar, roughly 60 and 80% respectively of those materials come from China. And, you know, as someone who spent some time in North Africa and Tunisia after the Arab Spring doing democracy promotion, like this isn't abstract, like it's a fragile concept. So I think we need to be very intentional about where we buy products and where we source materials from the world. Please do bring that up. Yes. Adam and I are dying quietly here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. I did a podcast taping this morning as well, which was worse than this, so it was pretty bad, yeah. Sorry, did you want to go on? Yeah.
Just two more things. So supply chains, when you compare to nuclear, 93% for OPG was roughly 93 to 95%. For Bruce, it was 95% of the refurbishments are made in Canada. The third element is the workforce. 90,000 people today work in nuclear. And we estimate about 150,000 permanent jobs being created over the course of the next frontier of nuclear expansion. $800 billion. I mean, that is larger than most of our trade relationships in Europe on an annualized basis. I mean, that is a massive investment to boost the workforce. Small, medium, and large enterprises are being fired up, and these are Canadian businesses that are in the room today. So for me, it is the obvious path. It doesn't mean we are, blindly pursuing nuclear, like some may argue in the governments of the past, we're blindly pursuing renewables at all costs, 10 times above market. Not at all. I just simply think if we are concerned about the sovereignty of where our materials come from, supply chains, the length of the assets, and the industrial value to Canada, I don't mean to speak rhetorically, but I just cannot imagine that any responsible government would not pursue this path. And it's something that gives me pride because we have now demonstrated to you all, including those who are maybe just not there yet on nuclear, although data would suggest they're part of an absolute majority of Ontarians. But even if you're a part of that, which is fair game, let the last few years of our experience refurbishing large-scale projects, both at Bruce and at OPG, to build your confidence. The Darlington is the world's largest nuclear refurbishment that was completed ahead of schedule and under budget. That is not done anywhere on Earth. And there's a reason why the French and the Brits and the Americans, it drew their attention, fundamentally the inspiration of how to do it right. And so for all of those reasons, we believe fundamentally this is the only way forward to double down on Canadian interests and to support workers. And you're going to see a lot more investment and more success stories when it comes to the industrial benefits of nuclear power in Ontario.
Last thing I'll ask you, because we're about out of time, or we are out of time, but so you can answer this quickly if you want, and also save your voice in the process. We heard from Minister Hodgson welcoming us off the top. Before you came in, Ryan and I were discussing, a little bit on what's happening through Ottawa via the Canada Infrastructure Bank and the Canada Growth Fund for the SMR project in particular. So there's certainly more federal support on the nuclear side for Ontario than there was previously. Wondering if there's more that they should be doing out of federal government to promote this, or are you happy with the relationship on this right now? Like, this is obviously, as you've touched on a bunch, a matter of economic sovereignty as well, an opportunity to increase trade exports and so on. So, what are you hoping to see there?
Well, first off, the federal government, who has a great sense of ownership of the intellectual property, we want them to continue to invest in maintaining a technology option for Canada and the world when it comes to a made in Canada nuclear technology. So they've got to put skin in the game. I mean, we're the client, one way or another, whatever we're deciding, we're expected to expend tens of billions of dollars to build it. And that's both in Bruce, and we got to do it again in Wesleyville in order to meet the demand forecast. We don't have a choice. So I do think their leadership in making sure that it doesn't go from 6 in the world to 5. We've got to maintain that leadership when it comes to being one of the civilian technology, a nation with an Indigenous technology made in Canada, I think is very important. So they've got to invest in the maintenance of that tech. The second thing is we do welcome their support on the New Darlington project. You are right. I mean, we've got the Building Ontario Fund. They use Canada Growth. That's helping to de-risk the investment for the ratepayer. We do welcome that. We want to see more of that. But fundamentally, the Premier has said this before, large-scale nuclear has such a massive return on investment to the supply chain, $1.30 for every dollar invested. I mean, it is so clearly from an economic perspective, from a decarbonization perspective, if you care about a clean environment and you want your kids to have a cleaner future, we're going to get to 99% according to Ontario's integrated energy plan by expanding nuclear and hydro. So if you care about the environment, you care about the economy, you care about intellectual property, you care about the workforce, this is why we've pursued this path. But I think on the federal side, what will be really important to do is, while we welcome those instruments that they've used, like, for example, the Canada Growth Fund, we want to see them using Export Development Canada as another lever, another sort of vehicle to help incentivize foreign adoption of Canadian technology. I think about when I visited Romania, the Cernavodă nuclear generating station on the second or third day of my appointment, insanely flying to Bucharest. Wasn't on my sort of list of things to do, but in the early days it was important, and the feds played an element of support there too. And so they have instruments that could help foreign governments adopt the technology, which benefits Canada because our supply chain is literally building for, in the case study of this, for Romania's nuclear expansion and refurbishment.
Okay. Thank you so much, Minister. There's a lot more we could follow up on there. I think probably some of our panels the rest of the day will touch on at least, well, probably all of this in different ways. So thank you again. Really appreciate your time here and being under the weather. And I'll pass it back to Ryan now.
Indeed. I would echo that, Adam. Thank you, Minister. You were worth the wait. That was a fantastic display of passion for energy in Ontario. Anybody here from EDC? I think we've laid down a bit of a gauntlet there. We'd like to see some investment from you. And I'm struck by how often you mentioned supply chains. I don't know how many times it came up, but that will be a discussion point that I'm going to delve into too. And again, thank you for being here today. And thank you, Adam. Yeah, I would have loved to have seen those guys go on for another 45 minutes, but that would be... Okay, so we're going to move on to the panel, our first panel of the day. So joining me will be my colleague and friend Emma Graney. She's from Alberta, also gets to Saskatchewan fairly often. She is the Globe's energy reporter, and she's going to talk about scale. Okay, take it away.
Thank you, Ryan. Please come up on stage with me, guys. Yeah, you can tell from Alberta I'm the only one in the room wearing jeans, right? Little bit of Stampede spirit. Oh, you as well. Well, Yahoo, as we like to say. So yeah, my name is Emma Graney. I'm the Globe and Mail's energy reporter and based in Calgary. Now, nuclear is actually a relatively new part of my beat because Calgary, so it's mainly oil, gas, renewables, pipelines, that kind of thing. So nuclear is new and I'm learning so much about it. And I'm actually really excited for this panel because I get to learn things too. It's really, really neat. And I think we're going to look a little bit out into what's happening in the West as well as part of this. But here on stage, I'm absolutely tickled to be joined by some big names in the industry. So we've got Scott Ryan, the Senior Vice President of Nuclear Operations at Aecon Energy. We've got Kim Lauriston, Senior Vice President of Enterprise Strategy and Growth at OPG. And we've got George Christidis, who's President and CEO of the Canadian Nuclear Association. G'day to you all. Thank you for joining me. So I just want to start with, what we're looking at in this panel is basically like this idea that Canada is entering what seems to be a relatively new phase of nuclear development. It's picking up, and with decades of innovation, and there's a strong safety record, and there's deep technical expertise, a lot of whom are in this room today. And so we're going to explore how these existing strengths are being expanded and also being mobilised to further strengthen and grow domestic nuclear capabilities. Now, George, I'll probably start with you on this first question. We wanted to start with kind of a broad overview of where things are at in Canada now, and I think you're in a really good position to give us that bird's eye view. So where are we at right now in Canada?
Well, thank you for the question. And actually, following Minister Lecce, for example, it's pretty clear there's a lot of exciting things are happening. And I have to say, right off the mark, the great leadership that Ontario Minister Lecce has played. Some major decisions have been made by this administration in Ontario, and major decisions are being made across the country that are really putting nuclear on the table in terms of meeting energy security, climate objectives. But there's another dimension that's actually driving it even further across Canada, which is the need for economic resilience. I think the current environment, geopolitical, which is a fancy word, but just given the dynamic with our largest trading partner and with the world environment, is putting on the table the need for real jobs and real economic planning. And that, in a sense, is creating opportunities across Western Canada. Saskatchewan, for example, we're talking about SMRs, but now we're also talking about large nuclear based on their uranium industry, led by Cameco and Orano, et cetera. Alberta is looking, as you well know, to the nuclear technologies, complementing both Energy Alberta, but also what SMR opportunities are with Capital Power and OPG. And that's based on also what's happening here in Ontario with significant investments being considered, 2 large nuclear plants, an SMR project that Kim will speak to as well, and of course activity that's happening in New Brunswick. And that's just the energy generation space. That doesn't even touch how those investments are going to touch into spaces like the university research, the polytechnics, the workforce creation that's going to be needed, et cetera. So it's a real exciting time for the country to really leverage all these assets here in Canada that we have and to take advantage of the opportunities abroad as well.
Okay, so zooming in a little, and Kim, I think I'll throw to you on this one, talking about kind of Darlington, Pickering, New Brunswick, that kind of thing. Can we dive into a little more detail there? And I know most of you in the room are probably like, Emma, why are you even asking this? We know all of this. But we've got a lot of people online as well from across the country, so I think it's really worth diving in a little bit into where we're at with some projects there.
Yeah, sure, thanks. And both Minister Hodgson and Minister Lecce spoke about the projects, but I do think it's worthwhile, in particular for those in the room or who are online who don't know about the projects that we are doing, and I'll speak to OPG. We're not the only ones. Bruce Power, as Minister Lecce also mentioned, has their existing plant and their plans for growth. But we have a number of different projects at various stages in the kind of pipeline of development, and staggered along, Minister Lecce talked about phasing our opportunities and creating optionality. So I can talk a little bit about the various points that these projects are at. So the Darlington refurbishment project, that's around a decade-long project that we've undertaken, and Minister Lecce did mention that last week we had a very positive announcement that we've completed the construction phase of that last unit, so we're getting that unit ready to return to service. And that project was completed ahead of schedule and under budget, around $150 million under budget, and which is great news. I mean, that is unique in the nuclear industry, and that project is one of the reasons why we've already heard so much about supply chain. We were able to reinvigorate the supply chain in Ontario through delivering that project and through Bruce Power delivering their refurbishment program, and that's really set us up to be able to grow and enter into our new development phase. So the next project that we have in the pipeline, our Darlington nuclear project, that's the SMRs that Minister Lecce spoke about. We have started construction on our first unit. We received our license to construct last year in the spring. So we're constructing the first unit. We have completed site grading for units 2, 3, and 4. So you heard we do plan to build 4 units at that site. And bring the first unit, bring power to the grid by 2030. And then beyond that, the next project that we haven't quite started the actual construction phase yet, let's call it, is our Pickering refurbishment. So our other large nuclear generating station, located very close by, just east of Toronto, will enter its refurbishment phase. I think we're 219 days off starting that project, so we're just in the final phases, and we'll go through the same level of meticulous planning, getting ready for execution. But in the meantime, that plant is working very hard to keep the lights on through this very cold winter. The IESO, the Independent Electricity System Operator, has also requested, as we were planning this refurbishment, to keep it on during the summer. We will need that plant in the summer, and then following the summer peaks, we will enter the refurbishment phase for that plant. And then finally, last but not least, Minister Lecce also mentioned our Wesleyville site, which is a little bit further east than our existing plants, near Port Hope. And that is where we have identified the possibility to host up to 10,000 megawatts of new nuclear. And we just recently submitted our initial project description for that development. So that is the kind of the key step that kicks off the permitting process. So lots going on,
Yeah.
from just about to finish and right through to kind of the early stages of New Large.
And when you came on under budget at Darlington, did you guys have party hats and a cake to celebrate? Because that's unusual.
Not yet. We will.
That lost opportunity next time. There you go.
Yeah.
So, given that there is this renewed global interest, and Scott, I'm going to go to you here, a big surprise. There's this focus on emissions reduction as well as energy security, and there's this bringing together of interest in nuclear as a to solve some of those solutions, I guess, solve some of those problems, rather. So what puts the Canadian nuclear industry, do you think, in a strong position to meet those increased electricity demands and the need for ambitious growth? Because what makes Canada special here, basically?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. And a lot of this has been highlighted already. We've been doing this for a decade. As we said, Darlington, we worked on that for 10 years. So that kind of puts us right in the middle of our kind of full fleet refurbishment of our nuclear resources here in Canada, and especially in Ontario. So we're just, like you said, just getting kicked off on Pickering. We're in kind of design and development stage now, boots on the ground later this year. And Bruce Power, we got 1 unit done, 2nd unit almost done, 3rd one in progress, and a couple more to go. So while there's been a lot of kind of interest in nuclear very recently, the teams that have been working on this and kind of paired up with Bruce Power and OPG, we've been working on it for a long time. So we built up a lot of skill trades capacity there. We've got teams that are moving from Darlington over to Pickering. We've got the ability to move people back and forth from Bruce Power. We've got project management teams. We've built out, full training centers to make sure that we've got the capacity to be able to do this. So when you take a look at what's happening on a global stage, we're doing pretty good as Canada, right? We're in a really good position. Certainly three of the largest refurbishment projects happening in North America are happening right here in Ontario, and the teams of people that are in this room right now are the ones delivering on them. So I think we're in a really good position.
So when you come through these projects, and let's look at, Darlington, for example, here, I know we spoke about this when we were preparing for this panel. I mean, there were obviously some challenges that were faced. There were some, I assume, big lessons that were learned. Can you go through some of those, just kind of broad strokes, and say, we learned this, and this is how we're going to apply it to some of the new projects that we're doing, or some of the future projects that we're going to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the risk of getting a kick under the table here, these projects are very complicated and challenging, and the way you start them often isn't the way you finish them. So there's a lot of things we learn along the way. And Darlington was no different. Very challenging, some very challenging elements. But I think the way that we track these projects, the way that us as AECON and our partners kind of work through these, allow us to take those lessons learned forward. In addition to the skills trade workforce, thousands of people that have now been doing this for a decade that can move from one project to another, our project managers, our project directors, and all the way up. We're able to kind of move all those people over but we're also able to bring over all the things we've developed, right? Think about the robotics that we have in place. We have some of our robotics partners in the room today. The things that we're doing to look to automate the way that we do our work, to remove our people from high hazard environments. The things that we thought were a good idea at the first unit we did in Darlington are now fully functioning, tied to a resource loaded schedule and planned to be done in Pickering. So it's really making sure that you're taking all those things that we've learned, and a lot of them is things that we've developed, right? A lot of this robotics didn't exist, the automation didn't exist. They are very specialized for the nuclear industry. The tooling and things that go into this are incredibly complex, and now that we've got them figured out and they work so well, and we proved that they work well at Darlington, we can carry them on to future projects so that we're in a better position. They're tied to the schedule. Like I said, they're resource loaded so that we know exactly what we need and when we need it.
And then, George, I want to throw to you here to just take it into a broader Canadian lens. When you look at what's happened here in Ontario, can you see other provinces taking away these lessons, and how do you think that they will do that in a practical way?
Well, I think you heard the minister speak about that coordination or conversation between key provinces, Ontario, Saskatchewan, Alberta, New Brunswick. And there is this increased interest in other provinces too, right? That is just sort of bubbling. The interconnection is happening at governmental level, but it's obviously happening between the utilities themselves, also the industry, supply chain, the union, labor. There's multiple points of contact. We also play a very important role in terms of those spaces, in terms of reaching out and sharing those best, practices. But one thing I just want to stress is that this momentum is happening, right? And this momentum is happening for a number of key reasons, but it needs to be enabled. And that enablement really does mean the coordination between federal, provincial governments, the need to deliver certain things around nuclear finance, regulatory, workforce, supply chain development, to take advantage of the opportunity that we now have as a country to leverage this industry that does apply across Canada, but also abroad. So that coordination is happening, it's live, and it's just sort of keeping that momentum and keeping that process going. And it is an investment in a long-term benefit of the country and of the provinces. And I think this is what the minister was alluding to, if I could just tip in another direction. The time to act is kind of now. And if you look at other jurisdictions, they made strategic decisions to invest for a long term. You can say whatever you want about China and Russia, but they make a long-term play, right? And they do it for reasons. Canada has a strength in the nuclear industry. It has the opportunity to leverage it. Big decisions are being made. OPG, Bruce, and Ontario are making big decisions. Therefore, how do we as a country leverage it? And again, I have to go back to some of these questions that come up are very valid, but we have to move fast for a number of reasons. So that's where we're at.
So just on the policy side, sticking with you there, Judge, what are the big hurdles? Pretend Hodgson's right there. You're not Hodgson, but you are right now. What do you say to him? What do you say? You need to do X, Y, Z if you were coming up with top 5 things.
I'll let Minister Hodgson answer.
I'm so sorry.
I'm just kidding. It's an inside joke. But the point is, there are probably 3 things that really have to happen. One is the nuclear financial models in place to support this build-out. And each jurisdiction, each province is going to have a slightly different take, right? But the financial model to de-risk these projects, and there's a lot of great examples of that, right? And it's not only in Canada, but also internationally in the UK, for example, where you have Caisse de Populaire Québec financing a project in England, right? Nuclear project. So just think about that a little bit. Secondly, you got the regulatory regime. You really need to reduce duplication, increase efficiency. The feds have to take the responsibility on First Nations, Indigenous right holders. It is a constitutional conversation that the federal government needs to have with First Nations. Industry is there for sure, but it's the government of Canada. And the third piece is taking a look at those spaces, such as the workforce development, what it needs, the supply chain development, and what that entails. And so these are areas that the federal government has a direct opportunity to proceed with. It had announced, for example, investment tax credits. We're still waiting for a lot of that stuff to work out operationally. So, we really appreciate the inclusion of nuclear in key core federal policies that have reflected themselves in the last 2 or 3 budgets. But again, the time is to act and to enable these opportunities to proceed.
Minister, I hope you're making notes there. Kim, I want to throw to you here about some of the, coming off of that lessons learned kind of thing, but what are some of the hurdles that you've seen that you think could come up and how they could be addressed to make things easier in other parts of Canada? I know that's a big question because I'm sure there were plenty of hurdles, but what's some that stuck out with you?
Yeah, I think I'll probably echo some of the comments that George made. I do think, so looking to the success, one of the things that we will need is that continued access to skilled workforce and the supply chain. We're in a really good spot in Canada, in Ontario in particular, but also across Canada. But that long-term policy certainty that George referred to, and we do see some of that through the integrated energy plan that was released in Ontario. I know that Prime Minister Carney mentioned last week that we can expect a national electricity strategy that I think is looking to double the electricity grid. Seeing the themes that come through there and ongoing support for an industry like nuclear will be important. Access to financing will be critical, and low-cost financing and the right kind of financing for large projects like this. This will require a significant amount of investment, so we will need to make sure that we can unlock that. We've done a great job with the projects that we have carried out to date in Ontario and really tried to leverage all the tools that we have available, but obviously with a expansion of this magnitude, we're just going to have to kind of double down. And I think the ongoing, it's already been mentioned, I think, but the ongoing supply chain and really how are we leveraging across different industries also that, there could be, we're not going to be the only ones who are growing, not just the electricity sector itself, but provincially and nationally, we know that other jurisdictions are going to be looking to do the same. So how do we make sure that we coordinate and collaborate where we can with our industry partners as well, will be important to deliver these projects successfully.
And then, Scott, from the industry perspective, rather, are there any massive hurdles that you can foresee trying to really expand the sector across Canada?
Yeah, I mean, the big conversation that we've been having with a lot of our partners is around that skilled workforce. Right. I think we are in a really good position today coming off of Darlington. We've got Pickering starting up. So, we're able to run multiple projects kind of in series side by side. But when you start to take a look at, we've kicked off Darlington, the new nuclear project. There's 3 more units to go. There's talk about Bruce C. There's talk about Wesleyville. We're talking about needing to add thousands of people to the skilled workforce in addition to the engineers, the project management professionals. So making sure that we've got, the funding in place for our skills trade and our union partners to make sure that we've got people coming through that are wanting to get into the nuclear sector and are trained properly to do so, all the way through engineers and project management staff to make sure that we can kind of staff up and deliver on these projects in the next, 10 or 20 years.
And George, let me throw to you here. I mean, Prime Minister Carney has many times said we want Canada to be an energy superpower, and that takes in all kinds of things: oil, gas, renewables, nuclear, etc. How big a part of nuclear do you think that realistically can be?
I think it's huge. I mean,
you would say that, though.
Just don't believe me. Just take a look at what's happening in Ontario in terms of 60% of the grid just now, based on, of course, the refurbishment. Success story of OPG and Bruce in Ontario that sort of set the impetus to go down these new areas and give confidence that large projects like this could be delivered on time and on budget, ahead of budget, ahead on costs, etc. If you take a look at the commitments internationally, whether it's COP, starting in the COP that was at the UAE, over 50 countries have committed to expand nuclear power, tripling of nuclear capacity globally. And it's all, again, predicated, as much as we talk about Canada, there's a huge trend that we're all tapping into, and it's global. And it's the revision of policies that originally restricted the use of nuclear, whether it's countries like Sweden, Switzerland, Nordic countries that we have an affiliation with from a values perspective. that are shifting policies to now move on nuclear, right? Some faster, some slower, but they're moving. France's reversal of the initial policy of President Macron, who looked at declining nuclear and now is expanding it. The Trump administration very robustly is expanding nuclear energy in this country. So again, it is a global trend where for a variety of different policy purposes, where originally was the climate, now it's about energy security, but also increasingly about creating jobs, because everyone globally is feeling the need for jobs and economic activity, is including nuclear technologies and nuclear industry across the board. So it is an essential piece, as well as the geopolitical relationship, because when you export energy, and you export nuclear energy, you're building a 100+ year relationship. I don't quite understand in Canada why we don't understand this, because China and Russia figured that out a long time ago. When you're exporting these technologies, you have a relationship that locks in for a very long time, whether it's through the national labs, whether it's through the regulator, whether it's through the utilities. And those relationships matter, as we've recently seen. And that's why, nuclear is an important piece of that puzzle, as is natural gas and other exports that we have. And if you're not exporting that energy, guess what? Someone else will. And that's kind of what happened to Europe a little bit. The tagline here would be, let's not be Germany. Sorry, but it's kind of true, right? So it's a little bit about the lessons learned of what happened there. And it's not just about nuclear energy. It's about a range of energy sources where, you could argue Europe put itself in a national security risk that we are all paying the price for. Because when you're dependent on 70% natural gas from Russia, and you shut down your nuclear capacity, you're now realizing, as an industrial country as Germany is, that it doesn't no longer have access to energy, right? So read the newspapers, read the articles online, you see the economic consequences of that. And that's why globally there's a re-look and re-inclusion of nuclear. And that's happening in Canada too, for slightly different purposes. So Germany has come up as an example along the way of just maybe learning of what works and what doesn't from the perspective of energy policy, not just nuclear, energy policy.
And Kim, let me go to you on this, the OBG kind of perspective here. I feel like you guys have got you've got your fingers in all the little pies of nuclear across the country. I mean, we've got Capital Power, and I don't know how much you can speak to this, but how much do you see the expertise that you guys have already brought to the table as part of the broader expansion of nuclear across Canada?
Yeah, I think it comes back to some of the lessons learned that you asked about earlier. We are going first on the SMRs. And SMRs, I know there was a question earlier about SMRs versus large, and we heard Minister Lecce say it's not either or in Ontario, it's both. And that might be the case in other jurisdictions as well, but SMRs have a special place in certain parts of the grid, where it can't potentially host large nuclear. And going first, we will learn a number of lessons. On our Darlington refurbishment project, we had about 8,000 lessons learned across the life of that project, and we carried them from one unit to the next. And the way that we phased that project was, we treated the first unit as a bit of a standalone project, and then with 2, 3, and 4, we overlapped a little bit more, but it gave us the opportunity to learn those lessons and carry them forward and make improvements as we went. And we're going to do the same thing with our Darlington New Nuclear project. Take a little bit more time with that first unit to get the lessons learned, and then be able to implement those into units 2, 3, and 4. And so when you look across Canada to other jurisdictions like Alberta, Saskatchewan, or even outside of Canada, in particular jurisdictions that might not have nuclear to begin with, so they need to stand up a whole operating entity. Delivering nuclear projects is a unique, it's not like you can take successful project management from other projects, that helps, but having that nuclear baseline and those lessons learned that we will gain from the first SMR is going to be extremely valuable to help other jurisdictions unlock nuclear. And as an industry, we will succeed or fail together, and we plan to succeed and succeed together. But it's in our interest to help other jurisdictions succeed as well, because the stronger the industry is and the stronger supply chain is, we will benefit from that in Ontario as well. So I think it's going to be really valuable for us, having taken this step to go first, to then leverage that and help others.
And then, Scott, from the industry perspective, I mean, can you weigh in on that SMR versus big nuclear? And specifically, I mean, you look at somewhere like Saskatchewan, and I lived in Saskatchewan for quite a while. You know, there's like 8 people live there, and they're saying we might go. Hi, Saskatchewan, by the way. I do like Saskatchewan. Sorry. Okay, there's 9 people. Go Riders. But you know, when you look at big versus SMR, and from an industry, how do you back the case for big nuclear when you're in a place like Saskatchewan or in a place like Alberta, right? Like, is there an industry argument there?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure the people of Saskatchewan would appreciate the 8 people.
No, he didn't.
There. No. Yeah. You know, to us, you know, the teams that we put together to implement these, and to your point, you know, OPG has been really leading the way, kind of reaching out to some of these neighboring provinces to start the conversation about what that's going to look like. And our team, so I obviously work for AECOM, but we don't do this alone, right? You know, Atkins Realis is with us, our technology providers, GVH. We are closely following these conversations to make sure that we can deliver the best solution. You know, maybe it is SMR, maybe it is large scale. For us, it's kind of whatever is going to fit best within the economy of that province and best tie into the grid. To what Kim said, SMR has a really it's a particular technology that fits in well in certain places in the grid, whereas large scale, you know, has great large applications, but can't be used everywhere. So for us, it's really about making sure that we're there to support and deliver those on time, on budget, kind of wherever and whatever technology is going to be used.
And do you think then that there kind of opens up when you're talking about expanding nuclear across, you know, in different provinces, that it opens up cooperation between provinces? I know the Minister kind of touched on this as well. George, maybe I'll throw to you on that, about how much realistically can provinces cooperate on this?
Well, I think they already are. Like they've set up an MOU structure, and so that enabled a lot of the initial, you know, sharing of knowledge and experience, particularly from Ontario, quite frankly, just a lot of the benefits from the refurbishment program, again, OPG Bruce experiences that fed into different provincial jurisdictions considering the future. So a province like Saskatchewan, you know, it worked out a relationship with OPG at the time. There was a relationship with, you know, a number of different parts of the supply chain. Cameco is based in Saskatchewan, so real input in terms of that province's learning and understanding, not so much from the resource side, but more from the energy producing side. And look, I mean, this comes up, you know, we have this great, you know, can-do supply chain tradition. We also, you know, Cameco and Brookfield own Westinghouse. There's a very interesting, you know, reality here in terms of Canada's strength in the nuclear space, and provinces are increasingly looking at how to leverage those technologies for their own benefit in the mix that makes sense for them. So, you know, questions like Saskatchewan, well, they're not going to make a decision if it isn't economically viable for that province. And for them to say they're looking at SMRs and large nuclear is based on solid analysis. So, you know, I'll defer to them to speak on what they want to do, right? But the reality, though, is that the mix and the look in each province will be slightly different. And nuclear will play, large or small, a slightly different role potentially in each jurisdiction as it considers what's right for them. So that's the nature of our electricity system, right? So I see a lot of cooperation, a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of interest. There's a reason why Alberta launched a discussion on nuclear. I mean, think about that. Like that took a long time coming. There was a lot of contact with the government of Alberta, stakeholders of Alberta, that go past 4 years. That sort of simmered at the time. A lot of engagement, exchanging information. And the Alberta government decided that it was worth having that conversation. That's very significant, right? And now you have 2 projects that are being looked at or being considered. And, you know, places like, you know, even Quebec, there's a sort of very preliminary understanding of this technology, just wanting to understand what does it look like, how could it look like. So that is a trend that we're seeing across the country, and that exchange is happening.
Okay, we've only got a few minutes left, but I just want to kind of put it back to all of you guys about the next steps that you think need to happen to really bolster the sector in Canada. If you were to, pick a couple of top things that you think, okay, this needs to happen, then this needs to happen, what would they be? Scott, we'll start with you.
Sure, I can start, and I think the minister kind of touched on it. The solidarity of our supply chain is incredibly important. So my number one message is let's not stop, right? We've got great momentum. We've delivered the first project early, under budget. We've got multiple more projects that are now in execution. We've got new build projects, again, just starting with future units, plus 2 more, full-scale size projects. We can't stop what we're doing. If for some reason we were to pull back or there's a decision to pull funding, that's really going to kind of stop that continuity in these projects and limit our ability from our team to be able to kind of move our teams and leverage that good knowledge that we have from one to another. And it really disrupts our supply chain, right? We've got technology providers that have built their business here in Canada based on decades of future work worth billions and billions of dollars. We need that to keep continuing kind of in the cadence that it's on right now.
Kim?
Yeah, I think I'd have to say continuing to deliver on our commitments and continue to deliver projects on time and on budget. But the other thing I'd like to add, and I can't remember if it was Ryan or Adam at the outset who talked about the need for transparency in the costs. And I do think one of the practical enablers that we for OPG's projects and the number of projects that I talked about is our OEB rate filing, so our regulated rate filing that we just submitted, and that's for our next 5-year rate period, and that sets out around $30 billion of investment that we're going to make to keep these projects going, all the while keeping rate impacts to a minimum at 2.4%. And I will add that OEB process, that is a very transparent process that we go through. So I think, not just delivering our projects on time and on budget, but being transparent through the process of how we're spending that money will be very important to maintain public confidence and support.
Yeah, that's a really good important point. George, you want to take us home?
I just go back to the discussion earlier about the role of the governments, and particularly the federal government, just to gently remind again the importance of nuclear finance, finalizing and proceeding with enabling the projects to proceed, the regulatory environment. And again, we touched on things like the supply chain, workforce, and the opportunities there. And it's the willingness to proceed with projects and sort of more exponentially enabling them to proceed. There's also on the nuclear waste side, we haven't even talked about that, but we have NWMO, Nuclear Waste Management Organization, world leading and is proceeding with its planning on a project. And even on that side, we have a very positive story to tell, that if you put it in the package, Canada is right now a world leader in this area, so in the nuclear energy space. So this is exciting.
It is exciting. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Scott, Kim, George. It's been a great discussion. I do love Saskatchewan, for the record. I did live in Regina for 4.5 years. But thank you so much. It's been a really informative discussion. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Okay, great. Good to see the Globe's Western representative breaking the ice here. Go Saskatchewan. That was a fantastic discussion around momentum and the idea that momentum needs to be enabled. Building on that foundation, our next conversation is going to turn to what it will take to finance this ambition. Investment, risk sharing, and policy alignment. So with that, I'm pleased to bring April Fong, my colleague, to the stage for the next panel.
Thank you, Ryan. So I'm April Fong, Senior Editor of the Report on Business, or Senior Editor at the Report on Business. Let's build on the momentum that we've established so far this afternoon. In this next conversation, I'm excited to talk about the money side of nuclear. As Ryan said earlier today, this is not cheap. So how do we unlock the financing needed to build Canada's next generation of projects, and how do we structure that capital so projects actually get built on time and on budget? Or simply put, and the question we may all be asking ourselves these days, how do we pay for the darn thing? Who better to answer those complex questions than our speakers here today? First, we have Sachin Gunaratne, Managing Director, Investments at Canada Infrastructure Bank. And next, I'd like to introduce Patrick Chabot, Managing Director of Projects and Cleantech at the Canada Growth Fund Investment Management. And finally, from TD Securities, I'm delighted to introduce Managing Director of Corporate Banking, David Manny. Thanks so much for being here today. I want to start this discussion by assessing the challenge that's ahead of us. Patrick, you're a leader at Canada Growth Fund, a $15 billion arm's-length public investment vehicle that was launched by the government to attract private capital to support the clean economy. From your view, how would you assess how we're doing in terms of financing nuclear projects right now?
Thank you, April. It's a pleasure to be here. I would say that Canada is doing quite well. We have a vibrant nuclear industry. We are successfully refurbishing and improving our assets. We have gone ahead and now we're building the first SMR in the G7 with the Darlington New Nuclear Project. So from that perspective, I would say that mission accomplished. The next wave of new nuclear will be very interesting in terms of how we decide to go ahead and build it. We've seen that the DNNP project will cost around $21 billion. And it has been supported by the likes of CGF and the CIB in terms of being able to receive the necessary financing to go ahead and start construction. When we're speaking about the large-scale nuclear projects, such as Wesleyville and Bruce C, we're talking about over $100 billion of capital that will need to be that we will need to find to really then build it. Will this only come from government? Definitely not. But how can we really help rally and put the necessary conditions in place such that financing is behind these projects? Well, there are several ways we can do it. We have to recognize that today, these projects carry a lot of risk. There's namely regulatory uncertainty, construction costs and timing of completion is uncertain. There is definitely an aspect of technology risk. There's an aspect of permitting, environmental assessments that need to be overcome prior to people putting capital behind it. And so as such, what you're seeing is that today, governments, such as the government of Ontario and the federal government, can really put in place a good framework and de-risk certain items that are present for investors and in the back of their mind as they think about supporting these projects. And I think that's what will be critical as we think about the next waves of projects.
That's a great lay of the land of some of the risks and challenges that we have ahead. Sachin, you have a similar vantage point at the Canada Infrastructure Bank. What's your view in terms of if we're too slow to unlock capital, what's the risk when it comes to the nuclear industry?
Thanks, April, and thanks for having me. So, great question. I think, from the Canada Infrastructure Bank's perspective, we have in the SMR project at Darlington $1 billion invested to date. And along with Patrick and the CGF and the Build Ontario Fund, lots of government support behind that project. I think there is, however, an opportunity also to bring in some private capital. I know it's not at this stage on the Darlington SMRs, but we have seen that happen in the past. So, when Bruce Power, which is entirely a private venture, started to do their refurbishments, they did approach private money. So, their owners put money in. They had money through a bond program through, TD Bank and others who invested, took some risk, and made those projects happen. So I do think there is an opportunity as we think about larger refurbishment to bring some private money into it as well, because government funding alone may not be available. And to answer your question directly, the risk is if we don't come up with models and deploy the capital at the right time, I think it will pass us by, because as we heard from the previous panel, there is a lot of interest globally, and as those projects get off the ground, money will chase those projects. But the good news is, we have a very strong and respected regulator in Canada through the CNSC. We have a lot of private companies with expertise setting up technology and supply chains to build these next wave of projects. So now I think the onus is on the financial community to come up with models that attract a lot of private capital into these transactions and also take some risk, not all risk, because the government has shown that they're willing to take the risk. But getting that private capital in to set up, to invest, is going to be absolutely critical.
I think Sachin just set up a segue,
That's right.
Shot across to you. So from a lender's perspective, how would you assess the financing landscape for nuclear?
Yeah, I think it's really strong currently, and I kind of bucket the financing environment for nuclear into kind of three buckets. You'll have operational projects, fleets, like you would have with OPG, Bruce Power, although a standalone site, 8 units on site, large power producers in the US with heavy nuclear concentration. So ample capital there. I think like the next stage of evolution that I've seen has been financing into the refurbishment program in Ontario specifically, which, you know, I've been around the space for going on 10 years now, and 2015, 2016, thinking through some of these refurbishments. And, you know, if you backread any of these long-term energy plans and the off-ramps that were worked in and so forth, it shouldn't be taken for granted what a big accomplishment it is to have Darlington successfully completed and the great execution happening at Bruce Power on those MCR refurbishments. So that's kind of the next stage. And I would say now it's kind of track record that's demonstrated, and credit capital markets will be looking through those projects as if they're fully executable. They'll have a budget. They're going to get done on time. I think next stage will be much like this SMR project happening at Darlington. And as that project is commercialized, again, I think with the help of concessionary capital through CGF and CIB, that'll show track record to what I call the commercial capital markets. And nothing would make me happier than to have a broad-based financing ecosystem for SMRs as you move forward. Large-scale nuclear, that's going to be, I think, the next frontier. When you think of the numbers, I think as Patrick said, going into the $100 billion range, not only finding the right structures and risk allocations that bring capital in effectively, but just the sheer quantum of capital. You're stretching the edge of bank markets, debt markets, equity markets conceptually. What I would say with those bigger projects is, yes, there can be risk sharing or risk assumption by some of those commercial parties. It's how can you put a bookend or a box around it so that you know the maximum quantum. Yes, there could be cost overruns where commercial capital providers are taking some dilution, credit metrics might get curtailed, but it's to a point, and then some of that risk is spread into kind of a broader based counterparty, whether it's the ratepayer, government backstop support. And, you know, I'd like to think that'll be in terms of a first of its kind project execution, and then ultimately, like SMRs, it'll get commercialized going forward, and you'll have, again, a robust ecosystem. And I would say you have a huge market in North America for mega project financings. If you think of LNG, offshore wind, projects are getting done. I think it'll be building that track record in the nuclear space that unlocks private capital in a big way.
Just to take us back a little while ago, on the topic of Darlington, OPG had tried to attract private capital into the Darlington SMR project, but the private sector wasn't really willing to take the risk. What did that mean for CGF's role in helping to make sure that project would proceed?
That's a great question, April. So yeah, to your point, OPG was looking at moving forward with its $21 billion DNNP project, looking for sources of capital. And when you look on the balance at the existing risk-return opportunity offered by investing in greenfield SMRs in Canada today, well, it wasn't there. And so private sector capital did not show up to really support this project. And the reason is a couple-fold. Well, it's the existing return that is potentially too low, the risks that are too high. Hence why there was a role really well crafted for CGF, the Canada Growth Fund, to act as bridge capital, effectively taking on those risks with a portion of our fund's balance sheet. We have committed $2 billion, acquired a 15% equity stake into the project, and then we are shoulder to shoulder with OPG advancing this project. When this project is sufficiently de-risked, this will give us an opportunity to monetize our stake to the private sector, who will then be the right owner for this asset. So if you look at what the government is doing, or CGF, we are effectively acting as concessionary funding. We're taking more risk than private sector would otherwise, albeit we will realize a positive return on this investment. But we're stepping in at a junction where the private sector is saying, yes, we want to invest more in clean power projects across Canada. If you speak to the Maple 8 or Maple 9 today, they'll be telling you we have capital available to support these projects, but you need to put in place the right conditions and financing framework to get us comfortable with putting our pension money into these projects.
Sachin, Darlington's first success has been celebrated. Do you think that this will be enough to attract more private capital into nuclear financing?
Absolutely, I think so. So when Bruce did their first refurbishment, 2006, when units A1 and A2, which had been mothballed for a number of years, were brought back into service. So it's 20 years ago. I was involved in that financing, and we went to 30+ institutions to raise the capital, of which we found 4. And fast forward to today, Bruce has got a tremendous bank group, tremendous bond issuance platform. They're rated, and from what I understand, new banks trying to enter into their syndicate every year. So when we hear success stories like what's happened at Bruce and Darlington, there is going to be lots of new money chasing those type of opportunities. And to pick up on what Patrick was saying, it's really getting the private sector the comfort that the risk can be managed and managed effectively. So after you've refurbished 2 units, the lessons learned for units 3 through 8 become bankable and financeable, because you've got a track record and you've got the engineers telling the lenders, look, it's been done, and it can be done at the right price and at the right schedule. The challenge we run into is with new builds, especially the SMR program that's underway, and also if we look at new builds of greater scale, I think the first couple will be more risky, and we will be more challenged getting private money in. But there could be tools that we could use to de-risk, and Dave alluded to this. It's government backstops, or having the ratepayers assume some of the liability up to a certain point, and private sector makes a return within a band if certain milestones are met, and then above that, maybe the government, ratepayers, taxpayers take the risk. So there are other models, as we've seen in the UK with how Sizewell C got done, even for those first-of-a-kind projects. But ultimately, I think you'll see, once the first couple of units are built, there will be lots of money chasing these projects, because, again, the technology is proven, the operators and the builders are proven, and so it would create the right conditions at that time.
That's a very optimistic view. David, you talked about this too, about the next challenge being with new builds. Mm-hmm. What financing structure do you think will be key to, what kind of financing structures do you think will be key to unlocking capital for new builds?
I mean, as I think a conventional non-recourse financing structure for an infrastructure project, ideally you'll have an offtake agreement or some type of rate-based return model on the underlying project. And then you'll have a construction counterparty that can ultimately backstop the deployment of that project. They will deliver the SMR on time, on budget, and private capital can look through that framework, say, okay, my costs are X, my revenue over an extended period are Y, here's how much dollars I can deploy, and I'll see that money returned at a reasonable credit metric. And similarly, infrastructure equity investors will look and say, I'm going to get a pretty prescriptive return on my capital, return on my capital as you work through it. That model, I think, evolves out of something like the Darlington SMR, where it's a first of its kind execution, the industry develops the track record to deploy in that fashion. And then you have potentially EPC firms ready to deliver the projects on that basis. You have regulatory authorities or transmission operators that are ready to give contracts, set prices. And then that's kind of, you're off to the races then. Then you've got a kind of a foundational commercial capital market cycle that can fund these projects in volume, not just one or two, but many. And I think that's kind of, my sense of, CGF and CIB supporting Darlington SMRs the way they have, it's to try to create that ecosystem as we go forward. De-risk the first of its kind, and then the commercial market will follow.
That's a great layout and guideline there. In terms of, we heard a shout out to CASE in the previous panel. Institutional investors are putting money into the UK and other markets. What is Canada not offering them today? Sachin, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think if you look at the case and their investment in Sizewell C, I think the structure that we have in place today on projects like Darlington just don't provide the environment for someone like the case to invest. So all our pension funds have lots of money to invest. However, in the Sizewell C project, there was a very clear sharing of risk between the private sector and the public sector. So what the regulator and the government in the UK did was they said, look, and I'm just picking numbers, if the project is under $10 billion, you will earn this much revenue for each electron that you produce. And the investors did the math and said, okay, that would translate into an IRR of roughly X. And they also said, you can expect that $10 billion will make its way into the rate base and the revenue would start on this date. Anything between 10 and pick a number 15, your revenue would be shared 75% risk on the private sector and 25 to the public sector. So between 10 and 15 billion, your returns start getting compressed really greatly. And then anything over 15, the government would take the risk on that. So you create a laddered approach where the private sector knows if this project comes in under 10 billion, here's my return. If it's between 10 and 15, this is my return, but it's less because I have to take the risk on those extra costs. And then anything above a certain amount, it's for the account of the government. So I think the alignment there of risk and return between the private sector and the public sector is what you need to get some of the large investors to invest. And I think, as we're thinking about future new nuclear or even large-scale nuclear, if we can come up with a similar framework, you would get lots of interest from the private sector. And that would create the environment and give us the runway to get some of the Maple 8 who have billions of dollars to invest so that you get certainty on that funding. And then you can also take some of the pressure off of the ratepayers and the taxpayers, knowing that you have a counterparty, the owner, who's really motivated to deliver this project at the lowest possible price, because after that, their returns start getting compressed.
I want to turn to the policy part of the framework that we need. Patrick, when it comes to attracting capital for nuclear projects, what do you think would meaningful federal provincial policy alignment, what does that look like in practice? What's the missing piece of the policy puzzle that we need for financing the future?
Yeah, certainly. And perhaps just before I get to this, I just want to come back to the reason why we keep focusing on the risk-return profile of any investment opportunity. It's not because you create an opportunity set that people will want to invest in it. You have to understand that people are risk-averse. They look and they will take the time to really understand what may make my investment going right or wrong, and if so, what happens to that capital. And the single biggest driver of levelized cost of electricity is not the capital cost of the project, it's the cost of capital. And so as industry, as government focuses on decreasing the risk, it is by no means that they're saying to private sector, do not take risk as you're investing, but they're actually helping themselves by reducing the costs to ratepayers by taking the risk that government should be taking. And I'll give you a good example of around policy. Today we are speaking about and creating momentum behind Wesleyville and Bruce C. But what happens if in 5 years this changes? Well, government need to tell the private sector today, we're going to be there. And yes, as you spend capital and spend time evaluating these opportunities over the next 10 to 15 years, we will not change course. Or if we change course, then you will be made whole for the time and capital that you have spent. So as we're building a great industry, as we are sending the right signals from a policy perspective, we have to make those decisions in some ways irreversible. Or if they are reversible, then private sector will not be in a worse off position from having made those decisions to support these projects at an early stage where permitting is not done, environmental assessments are not done, consultation with First Nations is still ongoing, and whatnot.
Thank you. Let's turn to de-risking projects. David, cost overruns and delays have historically plagued nuclear construction globally. From a banker's perspective, what mechanisms have proven effective at actually keeping timelines and budgets on track?
As kind of a credit investor, a debt capital investor into these projects, fundamentally, the first two places I go, I think I alluded to earlier, is a rate-based return where cost overruns just go to the ratepayer, and so the lenders go, okay, the costs will go in, ratepayers pay their bills, and there'll be revenue to come back to pay you back. It certainly de-risks the capital investors, but certainly not great for the ratepayer in certain instances. I think Sachin mentioned something more of a risk-sharing framework where there's incentives for those capital providers works. The other piece is if you have a construction manager, EPC counterparty that will, they'll be strong partners that will deliver a project on time and on budget, and lenders can rely on them in that interface. Other kind of more unique instances are where you might have a broader proponent that is deploying the project itself. So I'll give you an example. Sachin mentioned Bruce Power earlier. So even though it's a single site, it's almost like a mini independent power producer with 8 operating reactor units on site. So as lenders were looking through refurbishment risk on Unit 6 and so forth, if anything went wrong there, you had the risk spread across 7 other operating units, and you could find a pathway to get out on that basis. And again, that's kind of deferment of those execution risks into a stronger counterparty, whether it's a corporate offtake like a Bruce Power, an OPG, whether there's a government interface that comes in to support that. That's what'll get you there. And every situation will be different. And similarly, when you talk on the scope and scale of a new build, a large utility scale nuclear project, there's very few counterparties that can take that kind of risk adherence other than government-affiliated, ratepayer-affiliated counterparties. So the bigger you get, the narrower your pathway of risk or de-risking mechanisms get.
So on that note, both the CIB and the Canada Growth Fund are designed to accelerate investment in major infrastructure projects and attract private capital. Where should the public sector absorb risk, and where shouldn't it? Patrick, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. So anything that is in control, I feel, of the operator should reside with the operator. But external risks such as political change to abandon, say, nuclear. What happens if, let's say, it's getting the project experiences significant cost overruns, and so where does the completion guarantee comes from? Things like how can government really secure the support of the important stakeholders around the project. So those things are, to me, this is exactly the sort of risk that an investor will actually see more of a binary outcome than being able to manage around these risks. And so in working with project developers, private sector, I think the government needs to identify these pockets of risk whereby it can play a very important role in helping de-risk and manage those risks. And I'll give you an example of what, again, and we're referring to the work that has been done by the UK government in or around supporting investments by, let's say, La Caisse into Sizewell C. But one of the key things that the government did is they said, actually, if you're not able to insure your project, we will step in and ensure that this project can be insured. This is an external risk at the heart of what people are doing. With that said, it's been managed by the UK government.
Sachin, do you want to weigh in on that?
Sure, and I agree with everything. I agree with everything that Patrick said. I think, if things are under the control of the private sector, those are best managed by the private sector, and take the risk on those. The private sector should be taking the risk. But when it comes to certain things like policy, like regulatory environmental approvals by the Nuclear Safety Commission, all of those kinds of things which are out of the control of the private sector could be managed by the government. I think the other topic that we haven't discussed, but is, I think one of the previous panel members mentioned, is Indigenous relations. It's in our minds, it's not a risk, it's an opportunity to bring Indigenous communities into helping own some of these assets. And that's really a role for the government to step in and help through programs where communities have access to capital, loan guarantees, direct loans from the CIB, loan guarantees through people like the Build Ontario Fund, where they can actually borrow the money and invest. And then they also have a seat at the table, and quite quickly what some folks look at as a risk turn into a very great opportunity where the community is actually helping make decisions, and they're also a champion of the project, and that helps get a lot of approvals in a very timely manner as well. So we're actually seeing that in a lot of the investments we're making, where Indigenous partners are helping accelerate those projects in quite a way. All this being said, when we look at the models available and the models used across the country for things like transmission, energy storage, and other generation that is less complex, costs less money on tighter time frames, there is a lot of capital. There are a lot of models where the private sector is willing to take most, if not all, the risk. Because if you're building a wind farm, you've got half a dozen suppliers you can go to, and provided you can get the machines in on time, there is a very clear pathway to getting it built by a certain date at a certain price. But when you're thinking about nuclear, especially new builds, everything's out the window, everything's complicated. I'm not an engineer. I certainly don't understand how it works. I mean, I can see it in kind of a drawing and explain it in very high-level terms, but it's so complex that we need to make sure we have all the right people around the table who can get it built on time, on budget, and take some of the risk. And I'm not here to say the private sector should take all the risk, because that's not possible. But at the same time, we should look to optimize the models we're using to get these assets built, because take some of the pressure away from the ratepayers and the taxpayers. Because as we continue, and Patrick said, you need a pipeline and you need 15-year commitments and line of sight to getting things built. But when you think about how we are, what our Constitution says, we're trying to make 50-year decisions on 4-year political terms. So the other real important layer is how do successive governments who may not be of the same party, how can we make sure that there's a pathway to making sure that there's a consistent support of a project. So once a certain government starts, the next government comes in and they continue that, because that also has a major factor to play in capital being available. Because especially international capital, if there's a fear that projects will get canceled or projects will get stalled, then that impedes the ability for us to raise effective and efficient capital.
Another source of capital is foreign capital. Prime Minister Mark Carney has been touring around the world to try to attract foreign investment here. David, what role do you see foreign capital having to play in funding nuclear projects?
I mean, practically, I think you'll have a universe of international banks and international credit debt investors, likely equity investors, that would look at projects for the right risk profile and right returns. Ultimately, I think how those come together will be, well, practically it'll be certainly the more size you have in a project, the broader you would have to go. And as we think of new utility scale nuclear, like pragmatically, depth of just Canadian capital markets alone certainly wouldn't cut it. I mean, as I think of equity capital, maybe it's more consortiums, and it'll be kind of the most competitive. Who wants to bring that capital at the most reasonable price, and then you're kind of market clearing as it relates to debt financing for these projects. But yeah, I think particularly on some of these bigger transactions, foreign capital will be fairly critical to the entire process. And I think there'll be demand and appetite for it, without a doubt.
Okay, we have a few minutes left, so I want to end with a call to action from each of you as a final thought, and maybe in a sentence or less. What's one thing the people in this room, the nuclear industry, can do starting tomorrow to help unlock the investment that's needed to fund Canada's next generation of nuclear projects? Sachin, let's start with you.
Okay, with the luxury of a lot of time to think about this, I think for the people that are in the finance sector in this room, really starting to think about what are the models that can be presented that work to share some of the risk, not just put all the risk on the ratepayers and the taxpayers of this country.
On my end, it will be spread the word. We're doing fantastic work financing, building, and operating these assets in this province, and we should be really proud of that.
Yeah, I'd echo Patrick's sentiment. I think this fleet in Ontario, these are incredible assets, crown jewel infrastructure assets, in my opinion. Going back to 2015, 2016, I think Sachin mentioned, would have been a tighter universe to find banks, capital providers. I think the narrative around nuclear has just changed dramatically in terms of how much appetite there is for the sector. And I think, particularly the completion of these refurbishments on time and on budget, it's an incredible accomplishment. It fundamentally de-risks the life extension of this broader fleet. And then to stack SMR deployment on top of it, it's a fantastic story at the end of the day. So I think spread the word. It's a very, very good story, very positive story for Ontario.
Okay, so share the risk, build on our track record, and share the story with others. Those are really great calls to action, things that you can do tomorrow. We're going to wrap it up here. Thank you, Sachin, Patrick, and David, so much for your insights and expertise on this panel today. Let's give them a round of applause.
That was absolutely fascinating. That conversation around bridge capital is so important for de-risking, obviously. And as a journalist who covers these issues, just seeing representatives from the CJF, the Infrastructure Bank, out in public talking about these things publicly, not to take away from the private sector, with Chidi talking about debt and equity financing. It sounds like there's a conversation to have with our pension funds at some point. But in the meantime, this is now your time to get refreshed. So we're running a little bit over time, so if you could come back in 15 minutes, that would be great, and we'll continue the conversations. Okay, we're just waiting for a few people to get seated, but I hope you're all feeling refreshed and had a good break. We have two important conversations coming up for you. First, we're going to talk about supply chain. And secondly, we're going to move on to global opportunities. So why don't we get started? I'm looking forward to moderating this one myself. Today we have three industry experts joining us for this discussion. Adrian Davies, Vice President, Supply Chain Management at Can-Do Energy, Inc. That is an Atkins Realis company. Karen Hamburg, Partner and National Low Carbon Fuels Lead at Deloitte Canada. And Lisa McBride, Canada Country Leader at GE Vernova Hitachi Nuclear Energy. So welcome to them. So where to begin? I don't know how many times Minister Lecce mentioned the word supply chain, but it was many. One thing he didn't discuss in great detail is what that means and where those jobs are, what type of jobs those are. And I think probably each one of you may have a different perspective on this. But maybe, Lisa, we could begin with you on just trying to define the discussion around what are we talking about when we talk about a nuclear supply chain?
Sure. So thank you for the invitation to participate in this event. You know, we have a supply chain in Canada for the nuclear industry that is world class. And when we think about the supply chain, we think about the ecosystem to do everything we need for the nuclear industry. So everything from uranium mining to engineering, project management, manufacturing, all the way through waste and decommissioning. So that's how we generally look at the supply chain. And it spans beyond the companies that make widgets. We also think of it kind of a bit broader when we think about academia, R&D institutions, our national lab. So there is a pretty strong, robust nuclear supply chain that exists in Canada. It's predominantly located here in Ontario, given that we have majority of our CANDU reactors and operating fleet here in Ontario.
Karen, I know in our discussions leading up to this event, you mentioned, I think his name was Frank the welder. Is that somebody who you think about in terms of what supply chains mean in the nuclear industry for Canada?
Yeah, I believe the fictitious company that I named was Randy's Welding in Miramichi, New Brunswick. And Randy's Welding in Miramichi, New Brunswick is hearing a lot about opportunities in the nuclear supply chain. And so if I think about Ontario, of course, global seats at the table, national seats at the table, those seats are going to be occupied by Ontario. But there are other provinces, New Brunswick, which is one of our nuclear provinces, Saskatchewan and Alberta, which have nuclear ambition. We have British Columbia, we haven't mentioned yet. Our Conservative that's in opposition right now is very pro-nuclear. We have Nova Scotia, we have Quebec, we have other provinces that are nuclear curious. And so how these provinces are thinking about things then is where is the opportunity for participation in this nuclear supply chain. And so I have the very good fortune of doing a lot of work in New Brunswick, a province of 154,000 people, made sure I got the number right, building their second reactor at Point Lepreau. And so they do have a very skilled nuclear workforce that's involved in operations and maintenance and that is doing and has been doing for many decades now work there. But as they look for their second reactor, whether that's going to be SMRs or large-scale nuclear, there are questions then about how to involve more participants in that supply chain. And so I think what any of those provinces would see then, they would have the same expectations around provincial benefits and building out their regional manufacturing base and local value and jobs and all of these other things. But how they're thinking about it then is that the barriers to entry are high. The uncertainty, sort of outside of Ontario, is still high. There's still a degree of uncertainty about what to build, when it's going to get built, how to pay for it. And then the workforce demands are high. So there still does seem to be a degree of difficulty associated with that involvement.
Adrian, we have unfortunately not, as these things go, we have not actually had a chance to meet, but it's nice to meet you. I want to get your perspective on this, on that definition of supply chain as it relates to nuclear.
Well, the reason we didn't meet is I was on a panel in Saskatchewan last week, having the same conversations with a room full of Indigenous businesses. And one of the conversations we're having at that panel, it's one we have quite many times at the moment, is people tend to think of nuclear as this high precision equipment, and the barriers mean that they're not going to be able to part of this. But actually, if you think of the nuclear ecosystem, and we have people that need to do catering, security, cleaning, simple construction. There's going to be the balance of plant, which is if anybody's coming from, and as the advantage being in Saskatchewan last week, people who are in the oil and gas and the mining sector are going, well, there's work here that you can do. Don't get thinking that you have to be this big fancy nuclear ecosystem company to be part of nuclear. So it's really about passing that message down to the supply chain that there's actually a home for you at all levels of the supply chain. And that's not just about working for us, for ourselves and GE at the first tier. There's actually, I sort of see ourselves a bit, it was like a funnel. And both me and Lisa are directors in the OC&I, and we talk about trying to get OC&I to be this nuclear funnel. And it's about steering companies to the right part of the supply chain, and that could be, as I say, working for us as a first-tier contractor, or actually steering businesses to the second tier, to my supply chain, or the supply chain. There's actually levels of work for everybody in this industry that's massively grown at the moment.
We also talk about funnels in the newspaper industry, mostly relating to subscribers and how we funnel them down to become subscribers. Are there, and maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but when you're talking about that funnel, are there barriers to entry to getting people there that need to be addressed, and how do you start to tackle that stuff? Lisa, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, I think, we look at it in a couple of ways, as, coined as chicken and egg, right? Suppliers, when we think about the barrier to entry, yes, there's standards and CSA standards, et cetera, that need to be met. And so when we're looking at supply chain in particular, those are quality criteria we need. But when we think about expanding the supply chain, we need to think about how do we do that in a meaningful way. And what we've done at Darlington is key, right? So we've been really clear about the targets for what we're doing in Ontario with Ontario suppliers, but announcing multiple pack unit deployment. So when we were working towards the idea that one was the plan, and that was what had been announced and what was promised, it's really hard to get suppliers to get serious about where do they want to be in the supply chain, what do they want to be working on. When OPG in the province announced that it was a 4-unit project, that got the supply chain excited. So we kind of need to think about, there's a couple of barriers. One, it's having an order book so that there's something concrete for suppliers to think about how to sink their teeth into it. What do they need to do from an investment perspective? Where do they want to play and what do they want to be doing?
And what's your approach on that situation, Adrian, in terms of making sure that suppliers have that order book ready?
I think the first thing we have to recognise is that suppliers have to decide where they want to be in the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And we have to recognise that there are barriers to entry for a reason. I sort of have this analogy of the motor industry, is that how many times have you bought a vehicle and you've had a recall? Well, we don't get recalls of nuclear. That's not a good thing for us. So there's barriers to entry for a reason. And it's about working with the supply chain. And we've had quite a success in the last few years of actually taking suppliers and saying, you're not quite ready to work at our level at the moment. We're actually going to make introductions to our supply chain. And there's quite a few members in here at the moment with B2XT, I think MWI here. And we've seen suppliers that have worked for those organisations to get that to get that training ground that are now working for us directly. So we've sort of had that sort of apprenticeship, I suppose, and we're sort of moving on that quite a lot. And then the next one is we've been working on over the last 18 months is on the Indigenous side. Because the one thing that we have to do, and I've had some sessions with Marquardt Developments, who I've spent a lot of time with Scott and Shane, and they've said a few things for me. And it's, how do we ensure that we're not doing Indigenous procurement, which is a one-hit wonder? We do a project, they do the project, and then they don't do another one until the next project comes along. How do we create a supply chain when they're actually providing products, they're actually part of the life cycle and the maintenance of those projects? So that's one of the things we're trying to think for on the Indigenous side, is to make sure that we're not doing this one-hit project and we see them again in 10 years' time.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, the capacity building is obviously crucial to ensure that people are going to be there for the longer term. I know you had some thoughts on that too, Karen.
So NRCan's Enabling SMR program has been funding studies across the country that is, one of their objectives is to get more involvement in the supply chain. And so there is work underway to sort of look at, systems of components, where suppliers could reasonably participate as a first opportunity. If you're not nuclear certified, where are those opportunities? If it's valves or digital controls or instrumentation, those types of things. And so Lisa's bang on here talking about how this whole ecosystem, and that includes government funding, it includes academia, it includes the unions and industry associations that are really looking at where are those first opportunities to get in. And then I would also say too that the technology vendors, the GEs, the Westinghouses, the Atkins Realis have been fantastic in meeting the community where they are, speaking to them about opportunities for participation, certainly stressing that the bar is where the bar is, but that may not be for everyone right away. And so I think we see our technology vendors here in Canada too doing a great job to attract more people to that supply chain.
Can I just add to that?
Of course, yeah.
There's actual responsibility on us as well as the technology providers to make it easier for our supply chain to actually understand the routes into us. When I joined the business 18 months ago, we were very much a project business, and if you were a vendor and you were trying to get an opportunity, you had to try and get a contact with that project or this project or that project. And that's difficult. So one of the things we've done is to actually change and say, well, we're not going to do that. The projects are too busy as well to try and find new vendors, because the easy part for us is actually placing the order. The hard part is managing that order. So one of the things we've done to try and change things for the supply chain now is we're bringing in category management. So if you want to talk to someone in the business, you're going to have a product owner. So if you've got your product, you will know in our organisation, that's the person I speak to, and that's a person that's going to open the door to me, not just for Canada, but the global supply chain that we operate.
We're in an era of big projects, or we're talking about big projects. I don't know how many we're building right now, but the Prime Minister has said it's time to build big things. I do wonder what kind of competition that may build in terms of looking for skilled workers in this space. Lisa, do you want to address that one?
I mean, I think it's going to create an immense amount of competition. I think when you look at the initial projects on the major project list, so DNNP is a project of interest there, as are, I think it's 3 or 4 mines and the facility in Quebec. And all of that is going to take a lot of skilled labor. And when we think about, Minister Lecce mentioned this morning, even when we think about just Darlington New Nuclear Project, that's 18,000 jobs during construction and manufacturing. That's pretty significant, and that's what we're going to need pre-2030 when we flip the switch. So we need to work really well, I think, as a nation to make sure that we, one, don't cannibalize our own opportunities in the nuclear industry, but two, to make sure that we're supporting that entire economic opportunity that Canada has when we look at those projects. And it was mentioned a little bit this morning, but wasn't really touched on, but Ontario Power Generation and Bruce Power worked really well together on the refurbishments. So the Darlington refurbishment and the MCR at Bruce Power, and they balanced and blended their schedules in a way that didn't deplete the skilled trades workforce. And so one of the things that we do really well in the nuclear industry is we collaborate, we share information, and we share our lessons learned. And so if we just take that as an example on a way to execute not just one project that was announced ahead of schedule and under budget, but hopefully the Bruce Power project I suspect will actually be the same. That's because we're sharing kind of what we know and what we learn as we go along. And it's that shared success. So when we look at the industry as a whole, anything we do in this industry needs to be successful. It doesn't really matter what your technology is, doesn't matter what your project is. It's incredibly important that whatever step forward we take, that step is successful.
Does anyone else want to jump in on the issue of talent and competition there?
I think just to echo what Lisa said, it's the one thing I've been pleasantly surprised when I've moved over from the construction industry into nuclear is the collaboration. The fact we have these conversations, and now we have to sort of have those conversations across many sectors. We've got data center build, we've got oil and gas build, we've got transmission lines, we've got rail networks going in. So we have to make sure that we are having those project capacity conversations across sectors. Otherwise, we will be in for a bun fight if we're not working together.
To what extent do we need to consider the educational institutions in Canada and what they're doing in this fight for talent? I open that up to whoever wants to jump in first. Lisa, do you want to go?
Well, one of the issues specific to this, certainly around the transferability of credentials across and between provinces, and I think, and I'm hopeful that this time that we are in now, we're really going to start to address some of those bigger systemic structural challenges that we've had with that. And so I think too, these portable credentials across provinces, the challenge too is certainly an issue of headcount, but also a challenge of concentration and timing and location of those resources as well. And so we talk a lot about chickens and eggs, and I think we need some kind of chef or cook here in this kitchen as well to be leading, orchestrating, whatever that's going to be. And I just don't see any other way around it without making sure it's a national strategy and not just a provincial strategy or a sectoral strategy.
That issue of alignment, is that something?
Yeah, I mean, I think alignment is key. But I think kind of fundamentally, some of the things that we need to think about, one, in Ontario, there's a tuition freeze. Universities are really, trying to get creative to think about how do they meet the demand, without being able to increase tuition. But when I think about, skilled trades as an example, and some of my nuclear friends in the room will have heard me say this once or twice or 1,000 times before. But I think one of the things we would all benefit from is a bit of a brand refresh on skilled trades. What does that mean? What do those jobs look like? We're not talking, necessarily, kind of greasy fingernail type jobs. When I think about my dad was a welder fabricator. It was a very different job than when I was thinking about what I was going to be when I grew up. I thought, I like the smell of an acetylene torch. I could be a welder. My dad said, you're going to get a good job. That was the era where we wanted everybody to be teachers, doctors, and lawyers. We're at the point now where our skilled trades are six-figure jobs, high six figures. They are highly trained, highly skilled. They're doing really cool, innovative things, and it just looks a lot different. And so I think we need to think about how do we bring that into the education system in a way that makes it really appealing.
Everybody should learn to weld because you can fix anything.
You can absolutely.
Adrian, you just came back from Saskatchewan, so do you have any perspective on that skilled trades education element from a different perspective outside of Ontario, maybe?
I think the thing for me is I was having conversations with Andy probably the summer last year about, and it's echoing what Lisa said about, we have to get over to, I think the right terminology nowadays is Gen Alphas. I think that's a new one. It's a new one. It's not Gen Zs now. This is the next lot, because this is the generation that's going to be building these facilities. And we have to get over to them that, working in the trades is not a dirty word. You will have these six-figure paying salaries. And the worrying thing is they did a survey of these Gen Alphas at the moment that I saw yesterday. And they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? 32% want to be YouTube influencers. 20% want to be entertainers. 10% want to be streamers. So there's no mention. So we've got to change the mindset of this generation to say that social media is feeding you a lie, and actually there are better paid jobs, and we have to work together as an industry. And I'm not just talking nuclear now, I'm talking about the whole sector to say there are better, well-paying work that's going to put food on the table for your families, and that's the mindset we've got to change, and that's the battle we're up against.
So the future is bright.
Yeah.
Obviously, Canada, Ontario, we have had nuclear power for 60 years now. This is something that's been with us for a while. I do wonder, are there demographic challenges? And maybe that's part of what you're getting at here in terms of the workforce too, and maybe how do you get at addressing those? Because you do need that, long-term exponential kind of experience, but then you need others to jump in and get the work done quickly. And maybe those are two different types of jobs, but I just wonder, are there demographic challenges that need to be addressed here too?
I'm not sure it's demographic. I think I've spent a lot of time in the last 18 months traveling the globe, and the Canadian supply chain, other than the Chinese supply chain, which has been delivering and the way it's funded, this Canadian supply chain is the best global supply chain to be ready for the future. And I don't say that because I'm part of that supply chain. I physically see it. I've been to Europe, I've been to the States, and the supply chain is the best geared up for the success. And it's actually having that workforce telling the future generations of what good careers they've got. So I think it's just about getting that message out. The unions are spending a lot of time getting that message out. We need to get that message out to say to people, hey, this is a great industry. And it's, I never got my fingers dirty, I'm afraid. I'm a supply chain person, but this supply chain job has been very good for me. I've lived around the world and I've had great experiences. And it's about demonstrating there are many different roles, from engineering to accountancy, to business development, to the finance teams. So this is not just about working on the projects themselves. There's massive careers to be had for the whole sector.
In my opening remarks, I think I dwelled a little bit on the idea that this is Canada's moment, and I stand by that. I do believe it. I am wondering, in a lot of discussions, you hear talk of the technology as being the thing that makes us competitive. Does having the supply chain also make us competitive? And how do we maintain that? And we'll go with you, Lisa, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything in the nuclear industry. It's everything we've got going for us, right? It is the expertise. It's the projects that OPG, has done exceedingly well. We're not just talking a history of excellence in operations. We're talking about a $12.8 billion refurbishment, 4 months ahead of schedule and $150 million under budget. That doesn't happen anywhere else. So Canada doesn't miss. Ontario doesn't miss when it comes to nuclear. And so I think when we think about that, it's the entire ecosystem. The fact that we have a supply chain within our supply chain association, OCNI, there's 250 members that represent the nuclear supply chain. It's pretty robust, and I think OPG would agree that the refurbishments were successful, in part to the ability for the supply chain to be able to deliver the components with quality and on schedule that were needed for that project. We need to take that into new builds. We need to figure out how to make sure that we aren't going to miss, and it's about developing capacity as we go.
I'd open that up to both of you. Do you want to jump in, Karen?
I'll chime in on that one, because I think we do have, and it's come up on some of the other panels, an opportunity here specific to Indigenous partnerships and participation. And so, again, in New Brunswick, I'll tell my New Brunswick stories, the North Shore Mi'kmaq Tribal Council, the Wolastoqey Nation, they have entered into MOUs with Westinghouse, or the North Shore Mi'kmaq rather, with Westinghouse to explore the AP 300. There are equity arrangements with ARC and Moltex that were signed in 2023. And it's viewed as the Indigenous communities are strategic energy partners, and therefore the supply chain opportunities need to be part of the structural design of all of these arrangements as well.
Yeah, and one for me is that we're doing quite a lot of projects overseas at the moment, and it's when we're placing orders. I mean, we've probably spent $600 million in the last 18 months with Canadian vendors servicing our overseas projects. And it's an easy sell for me when I'm going to my overseas clients and going, this is my supply chain, this is what it looks like. It's a very easy sell because, we've got this track record of delivering these projects. As I say, we keep a milk in it, I'll keep a milk in it. It's, faster than schedule and under budget. And they look at the Canadian supply chain, in many cases, with a bit of envy. And what they're looking for now is how can we use that supply chain on our projects to actually help develop some of their supply chain as well.
Is there a dollar value to all this that you're aware of? Is there some sense of how much this is worth to the Canadian economy? Do we have a sense of that?
Well, I can give you that if you're talking about a sort of 1,000 megawatt reactor, just literally on the equipment side of it, you're probably talking about $4.5 to $5 billion per reactor. Yeah. And that's just the equipment. That's not the construction element. That's not the steel, the concrete, the subcontractors that have been working on those projects. That's just pure equipment.
Yeah, I think the published numbers for DNNP for 4 units was about a $38 billion contribution to Canada's GDP. So that's direct, indirect, and induced jobs. So when we think about that on the whole, that's significant. That's for what we're doing at Darlington. Never mind what will come when we do large nuclear in this country.
And that rolls on. Once we are successful here in Ontario, and we start to build this technology overseas, that just rolls on again. We're talking about what we're going to do here in Canada. It's the knock-on effect afterwards. It's the exporting that experience and technology.
So I think everybody's talked or mentioned collaboration as one major theme that needs to happen. We've just got a few minutes left. I would really love to get your perspective on sort of the one thing that we need to get right on the supply chain question to make Canada successful, and maybe we'll just start with Lisa and go across the board here.
I would say workforce. Workforce is critical path.
I would probably add sort of some degree of strategy and specialization by region across Canada. This is a national opportunity. Certainly it's anchored here in Ontario, but there are lots of other provinces with nuclear ambition and lots of excitement in other provinces as well.
I will go on there. I want to expand on what Scott said in one of the earlier panels, and that's we need to keep the momentum going. We can't go project, stop, because we don't get that learning. That's the benefit of Darlington. That'll be the benefit of Pickering. That's the benefit of the Bruce, is that continual progress. So we have to make sure that the refurbishments go to projects. We don't want to lose that learning and that speed that we've built up now.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you and your perspectives today. So that concludes this panel. Emma is going to come back for our next panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan. For those of you who may just be tuning in or just joining us, my name is Emma Graney. I'm the energy reporter for the Globe and Mail based in Calgary. And we've had some great discussions, really interesting insights about domestic capabilities and some challenges and opportunities. But what this panel is about is how can Canada leverage its strength to kind of capture international opportunities. So we're going to broaden the lens here a bit. And let me introduce, of course, my three speakers here. So John Gorman, the President of Westinghouse Canada. We've got Leslie McWilliams, the President and CEO of Laurentis Energy Partners. And John Macquarie, the President of Commercial Operations at BWXT. So we do have two Johns. I am Australian, so John Macquarie, you might be called Macca or Johnny Mac. So don't take offence, it's just easier that way. I can call you Gormo if you'd like, if you feel left out, but...
I didn't think anyone could make something of Gorman, but I think going with Mako sounds great.
These names will not survive this event, okay?
Well, you say that now, mate, but... So, I mean, we have talked about this already today on a lot of different panels, but there is this renewed global interest in nuclear, given the focus on emissions reduction, energy security, soaring energy demand, and how we meet that. Now, I know you're going to hate me for bringing this up, but it is a massive change from the 90s. Remember the Simpsons episode, Three-Eyed Fish? That was kind of this public perception, and of course, there is still concerns about safety. There's still concerns about end of life. Not everyone is on board. But John Gorman, let me start this with you. Why do you think the conversation around nuclear globally has changed as significantly as it has?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. I think you hit on the macro reasons why we're seeing a renaissance in nuclear energy security, particularly after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the climate crisis. It doesn't seem to be in flavor right now or in the front window. Energy security has replaced that, but we all know that existential threat is still there. We're going to have to convert molecules into electrons. They're going to have to be clean. We're going to need a lot of power, as we all know. And the growing demand, not just population growth and things, but certainly things like artificial intelligence and these new data centers, which are driving incredible demand. So those are the underpinnings. What I will say is, you spoke about the 1990s, and we have seen some cycles. I don't think we're going to see cycles any longer. These issues, demand, energy security, the climate imperative, they're not going to go away. And it's just become very clear that the solution to that is clean baseload power. And now you can get it in almost any size you want. So I think we're going to be seeing nuclear become the dominant and enduring power technology for the future for the world.
And now Johnny Macker, when you talk about this recognition of how things have changed, I mean, has that then changed into firm commitments? Has it, are there tangible outcomes here and people going, yeah, okay, well, we need to do this, so let's actually do it? Or is it more just of a vibe?
It's definitely not a vibe. I think it is turning into tangible commitments in terms of purchase orders for suppliers, right? So we're seeing orders from advanced reactor developers around the world, but certainly a lot in the U.S., some in Europe, that they're not ready to build yet, but they're designing, so they need engineering support. We're seeing, beyond that, we're seeing a lot of government support for what's going on. If you look in the U.S., there's a massive amount of funding going into advanced reactor development programs, and that's flowing through that supply chain and turning into orders. There's similar, but a little bit behind the U.S. happening in Europe. And so, yeah, there's real business that's going on here that's really encouraging.
Yeah, Leslie, let's go to you on that. A lot of things happening in Bulgaria, for example, and Romania. Can you talk us through what's happening there? Because I think that's a really good example of some real, tangible action.
Certainly. We have a lot of work happening in both Romania and Bulgaria. So I'll start with Romania. As part of Laurentis Energy Partners through our European branch, which is called Canadian Nuclear Partners, we are providing engineering and project management services in support of Cernavodă's Unit 1 refurbishment. And so for anyone who does not know, in Romania there are, as of today, 2 Canadian CANDU designed reactors in operation, and Unit 1 is going to be ready for refurbishment in 2027. And so Laurentis has been hired to bring the experience, lessons learned, leverage the Canadian experience to help support Cernavodă in that planning, preparation, and building a credible schedule for their successful Unit 1 refurbishment. And so that's an example of Canadian CANDU refurbishment. And then over in Bulgaria, we're excited. We've just kicked off a new project on new build, which will involve 2 new AP1000 reactor designs. And so that's a consortium. That's a consortium between Laurentis Energy Partners, Canadian Nuclear Partners, and John McCorry here, or J Mac, I think you referred to him, is my business partner with BWXT. So we did form a consortium to combine our expertise and knowledge through engineering services and oversight and project management throughout that multi-year project for the successful construction of 2 AP1000 reactors.
And so where else, and I'll open the panel on this one, but where else in the world are there real opportunities for Canada that you think, okay, we're going to eye that market, that would actually work?
Well, I'll jump in. So looking at this from a Westinghouse, Cameco, Brookfield lens, right? I think most people are familiar with our ownership structure at Westinghouse. We're owned by two Canadian powerhouses, right? Cameco, the world's second largest exporter of uranium, and Brookfield, one of the largest alternative asset financing companies in the world. We are also, our technology is in more than 50% of all of the reactors that are operating right now. And at this time, we're seeing not only this developing demand in Canada for large reactors, and in the United States, where they've announced that they're going to be building out 10 over the short-term future. But Westinghouse has over 30 other units that are in various stages of contracting and construction right now. Our AP1000 already has 6 units in operation, right? It's the most advanced large reactor in the world. So you can see as John was saying, these are real orders, real work that's going on. So the demand is huge.
And I mean, just looking, where else are you looking at that may not be happening right now, but you're really going, yeah, that one?
Yeah, thanks to the fact that Ontario Power Generation is moving ahead with building the BWRX 300, and we're fortunate to be involved in that, and specifically with the reactor vessel. We're seeing a lot of interest, which we hope will turn into orders from various places around the world, like Poland, other parts of Europe, Eastern Europe, and the US. So, that's, I think, a great example where we do something here in Canada, and it just is a pretty powerful platform for us as suppliers to then be able to leverage that and sell around the world.
And then, talking about this risk question, this has come up, I think, throughout most of the panels here. I'm not sure who wants to take this. John Goldman, this might be a good one for you, but, there is a vast amount of nuclear power plants being made, particularly in China right now. I mean, it's just an absolute powerhouse. And, I think there are more than 30 being built there right now, whereas Canada, it talks a lot, but there hasn't been anywhere near as much action. So do we risk falling behind on the global stage, do you think?
I think, this is a great point, Emma. I think we are the envy of the sort of OECD world right now in terms of the work that we've been doing in nuclear for decades, frankly, but now for all of the reasons that we've been discussing, whether it's the small modular reactors or the refurbishments, a lot of eyes are on us. And to Ryan's point, was it Kairos, Ryan? Is this the specific moment in time for decisive action? For Canada, that decisive action has to be continuing the momentum and progressing with the new builds so that we don't have a stop-go here, that we diversify our supply chains even further, that we execute here at home and participate in these export markets. I think Lisa McBride said it very well. We need that supply chain to be strong. When it comes to risks, a risk is having to re-engage your supply chain over again, and so we need to continue this momentum so that our supply chain can really diversify and participate in these export markets.
Leslie, what about you? Do you think there's other ways or have other ideas about how Canada can avoid falling behind and kind of going with that momentum, as John was just saying?
I think that in order to maintain Canada's advantage is to deliver and deliver well on the projects and commitments that we currently have in progress. And that really maintains our credibility and our reputation. And we've heard all about that this afternoon through successful refurbishments, through first-of-a-kind new builds and the progress that we're making there. So I think that is critical. And then as well, I would say what is important is the advocacy that we do see at the government-to-government level. And so for us, that's important at the federal, provincial, and through ambassadors. And I think we're seeing that. We heard that this afternoon with Ministers Hodgson and Minister Lecce. So continue to do that to maintain those strong international relationships and partnerships.
And do you have any thoughts then, Maka, on how we can, as Canadians and as the Canadian industry, really forge those diplomatic and those policy ties that seem to be really important in terms of, getting into other countries and getting contracts in other countries?
Yeah, I think it's critical on two levels from my perspective. One is forming relationships with like-minded countries where we can sell reactors, right? And that's just such a massive benefit to our economy because there's this huge tail of business that comes with that, and we've seen that over and over again. There is also our supply chain getting into places which is not Canadian technology traditionally, and governments have a role to play there too, just in terms of helping us with export financing, with helping us to use the consular offices and build those relationships and really just make connections for us and help us find those customers. And then it's up to us, really. We've got to take the benefit that we've got here in Canada, which is really good demand from life extension, to invest in our businesses and really become innovative and leverage that, because it is a tough competition internationally, and we've got to be able to compete on that stage.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, if I could just jump in there. This really is such a moment for Canada. And when it comes to government support and involvement, we've talked about a number of ways that can happen and has to happen. But one of the ways it has to happen is with the federal government and supported by the provincial governments coming forward with a real vision about what we're trying to accomplish here with our nuclear sector. And I mean this in the sense that, as a middle power, we do a few things, a small number of things very well. And one of them is nuclear. It's not just our proud history of nuclear with CANDU technology, the refurbishments that are going on well, the leadership in the small modular reactors, the fuel cycle that we have through Cameco. The uranium part of this equation, that's not like a manufacturing capacity you can build up, right? That's geology. Either you have it or you don't. Canada sits on that, and now with Cameco having ownership of Westinghouse, with not just the most advanced technology in the world, but also a services component and a fuel fabrication component. My point is that Canada's in the position now of owning, two of the world's leading large-scale technologies. We're doing groundbreaking stuff with small modular reactors. We're diversifying our supply chain. We have the entire fuel ecosystem that accompanies it, along with some outstanding pension funds and organizations like Brookfield. We can be a world-dominating force in nuclear, civil nuclear, provided that we have the vision that is calling for us to see beyond just what we are going to accomplish in the next few years to what it is we want to accomplish across Canada and into markets around the world. So we need the government to come forward with that full vision.
And I want to throw this to you, Leslie, about this idea of getting into new markets. I mean, what specifically do you think can be done to identify where, Canadian companies should go? They should take their technology? Is it just about reading the markets, just about reading, policies from governments, or is it more to it than that?
I think it is about understanding the markets and understanding where there's a need. And I think, John, you said it about where there's minded business partners where you can collaborate and then successfully implement that new technology, whether it's the chosen nuclear technology. And I would say there's other services that can be marketed and offered as well. So in addition to providing electricity here in Ontario at Laurentis Energy Partners, we also are involved in producing industrial and medical isotopes using the Darlington nuclear reactor. And I think that's another exciting avenue that does support nuclear to highlight additional benefits to provide those life-saving medical isotopes that can be used globally. And so for Laurentis, we're proud to be part of that in Ontario and in Canada, and look to support that in a global perspective from a global supply chain.
And John McCrory, what do you mean, who do you reckon is our biggest competitor here? If you were to look at other countries that do nuclear and you're like, oh, we've got to beat them, who do you reckon is our number one competitor? Are we just the best and no one's anywhere near us?
I think we're great, but yeah, I would say China is a formidable competitor, really advancing in all areas of nuclear technology really quickly, right? And they can build reactors quickly. They can, they're advancing technology at a rate that is almost unmatched. I think the U.S. has been not a great market for a while, but I think it's going to change rapidly with the amount of interest that you're seeing now from the current administration, the money that's flowing into that. So I think those two countries obviously are significant competitors. But I think maybe we have to look at it a little bit differently and think more about how can Canadian companies penetrate into these different markets, and there it becomes very situational. We have to really look at what is either rare or unique about what we do, right? And so at least for our company, for BWXT, there's places in the world where they just don't know how to make large components, right? And so we can go into those markets and leverage that. It may mean that we have to localize and work with partners, and we've done that, and because we understand that there's a certain desire for economic development in those places. But you can really leverage what others don't do. And in Canada, we've been doing it a lot, despite not building a lot of new reactors. We are now, but doing a lot of life extension. We've developed those skills in supply chain that others don't have. And I think that's where you can really be effective and win.
And this idea, and this has come up a few times today, about this idea that, the eyes are on Canada right now when it comes to development. How important is somewhere like Saskatchewan or Alberta or New Brunswick or what they're doing? How important do you think those examples are for other countries kind of weighing up, potentially looking at nuclear? John or Leslie, want to jump in on that? Are they looking that closely at New Brunswick, do you think?
New Brunswick, did you say?
Sure, yeah, New Brunswick. Or
just
Saskatchewan.
the provinces. Look, I think this goes back to my earlier point about Canada really needing to have a vision for what we're trying to accomplish here in a pan-Canadian way, and in an export market, whether it's for global security or economic reasons or what have you. And certainly how we roll out large nuclear across the country is going to be very important, right? I mean, ask Cameco. They are looking at very significant investments into the fuel cycle here in Canada, additional investments. And you heard Minister Lecce say, Dale, did he say a quarter of all conversion goes through Ontario right now, of the world's uranium supply? Well, I don't think I'm telling tales out of school by suggesting here that Cameco's under a fair bit of pressure right now to talk about making investments in fuel enrichment facilities here. They've got their own technology. But that requires a plan. You don't, again, to Lisa McBride's earlier point, you don't build an enrichment facility for Easter Monday or something, right? You need a plan for how many units are being built out across this country. And I think as Canadians, we're pretty modest. We've got to recognize that it's not just the 12 units here in Ontario, but potentially 2 to 4 in Saskatchewan, 2 to 4 in Alberta. Suddenly you're talking about a pretty big portfolio where you can do some very exciting things in terms of your domestic investments in supply chain and your capacity to serve other markets. And so yes, those provinces are very important, and how they come on board is important. The very last thing I'd say, and it's just related to John's point about China, we do have to figure out in the OECD world how it is we're going to compete with that sort of state-owned financing solution that China brings, right?
I was going to add something there about Sask Power, is collaborating, so on the Darlington new nuclear project. And I do see benefits for that collaboration, because it brings that opportunity for those lessons learned and shared experiences that do make us successful in the nuclear industry. So I do see value, and we are seeing that kind of collaboration.
Yeah, and just going off of something that you were speaking with about earlier there, John, when you talked about, let's go back to Ryan's earlier remark, right? Wave the Canadian flag for a second. What is it that Canada offers And Adrian mentioned this in the last panel about the supply chain, is really very established here. But what is it in your mind that Canada really is awesome at and offers that others just simply do not? That can help us, go around the world here.
Yeah, I think when others look at Canada, they see predictability, right? They see that we have delivered on what we do. And that, when you're making a big investment, you want to know that that's going to happen, that there's going to be follow through. And I think we can show a track record of performance that is good. I think we have, this diversity of supply chain that many countries don't have. And so they know that there's going to be that capability to provide everything that is needed, if that's what's needed. And I think we work well with other nations, right, in terms of partnering with them, trying to help them to be successful at what they do. So they know that they're going to have good intergovernmental kind of relationships with us. So I think those are our strengths.
Leslie, John, it's the Olympics right now, so just be super into Canada and tell us what you think. The Canadian sector does that other countries don't. Aside from, ice hockey. Hockey.
Okay. Well, I believe wholeheartedly, so Canada offers a unique combination. I would say first we have the proven reactor technology, and then I would say we have decades of operating experience providing that safe, clean, reliable energy and power generation. And in addition, I'll throw in the producing medical and industrial isotopes. In Canada, we have a trusted regulator, and we also have the framework in place that I strongly feel makes us a credible and dependable and a reliable long-term business partner that any country outside of Canada that wants to pursue nuclear, whether it's new, whether it's expanding, whether it's refurbishing, would want to partner with Canada.
Well, it's all been said. We're doing everything right, literally, and we have every piece of the ecosystem in this country, from the mining of uranium to through the entire cycle, and now being a world leader, frankly, in terms of how we're going to permanently store our waste. We are a shining example of a country that has not only an incredible track record, but is performing well now and has a very bright future as long as we keep that momentum up and keep moving.
Is there any place here, and I'm not sure who would like to answer this, but for, the federal government has made a few fairly significant trade agreements lately. Is there a place in those trade agreements, or are those trade agreements key to getting nuclear investment, like getting nuclear companies from here into those other jurisdictions? We've had China, probably not, because they're doing a lot on their own already, but is that something that the federal government should be pursuing? Do they need to get their boots on the ground there?
I'll jump in. I shouldn't answer questions I'm not 100% sure of the answer to, but yeah, and getting to that, the political side there. We don't see this coming into trade agreements. I don't see it coming into trade agreements. I'm thinking more of the other ways that the federal government is supporting. For example, right now, Export Development Corporation has given us an LOI. We're identifying and investing $2 billion in the Canadian supply chain here to participate in the build-outs we're doing in Poland. That's significant help, right? The federal government helped with Romania as well, right? A participant with funding there. That sort of, so not really trade deals, but certainly that presence and the financing to help us participate in these markets are important.
And do we see this continuing over the next few years? Over the next decades to come, that Canadian companies rather go into those other countries? Or do you think that internationally other countries are just going to kind of take it and run with it and develop their own sectors?
I think it's difficult to...
I'm asking you to look into a crystal ball there. I'm so sorry, that was rude of me, but...
I'm sorry?
Making you look into a crystal ball that you don't have in front of you.
Yeah. So I think that it's difficult for countries just to say I'm going my own way when it comes to nuclear, right? They need they need partners in that. They need help in that. It's certainly where we're going to be successful. They need help, right? If they're already developed, then that's a different story. To your question about trade agreements, from my perspective, I think they are essential, right, to us being successful because, if you look at what's going on right now between Canada and U.S. and there's uncertainty about what's going to happen there, and we're seeing customers say, hey, look, I don't want to take that risk, right? So if there's suddenly a tariff between our countries, you have to deal with that as the supplier, not them as the customer, and that becomes very problematic, right? So that kind of uncertainty just really freezes business and makes it difficult. So I think, yes, we need trade agreements and all the other agreements that you need to be able to deal trade and nuclear. But then, you need to be able to target places that you're going to have a stable relationship with because it's a very long-term kind of deal to work in nuclear, and where you know that you've got a place where you can develop together and probably trade together for decades to come.
I think we're going to wrap it up there on that note of cooperation. That's really nice and very positive. Thank you so much for joining me here on the stage. It's been a great discussion, I think, all day, and some really interesting topics that we've covered. So thank you so much, John and Leslie. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, folks. Right, so Ryan quotes ancient Greece. Emma gives panelists nicknames. Who said the globe isn't fun and games? This is it for the program for today. I want to thank everybody for being here. I think it was an incredible discussion on many fronts, but the big takeaway for me is that we're not talking about what could happen, but we're talking about what is happening in the nuclear industry in Canada. And obviously, this is a pivotal point for Canada. So on behalf of the Globe and Mail, I'd like to thank everybody who came today to make the event possible. Thank you to all of our guest speakers. Thank you to our great moderators from the Globe itself. And I'd also like to obviously thank our sponsors for their support, OPG, Westinghouse, CanDo Energy, Inc., the Canadian Nuclear Association, Aecon Nuclear, and WSP. Thank you again for making the event possible. And of course, a big thank you to you, the audience, and everybody who was watching across the country today. For those of you who are here in person, please, this is probably one of the most important parts of a day like this, is to stay a while, talk to each other, talk about what you've learned today. So thank you again.